Kino's Journey Volume 1 by Sigsawa Keiichi. Prologue. In the forest be lost in the forest be. And so darkness encroached. The world, devoid of light. The moon and the stars, out of sight. Audible was only the gentle sound of wind wafting through trees, as if adorning the darkness. Let's see, it's still just a vague feeling, but... Suddenly, the sound of human conversation could be heard. A slightly high-pitched voice, similar to that of a young boy. But... A different voice made a questioning statement, as if to press on the matter. Another young-sounding voice, similar to that of a male child. There was a brief moment of silence before the first voice quietly spoke up once more, in an expression as if attempting to convince oneself of something, as if giving a soliloquy. Sometimes I wonder, am I an insignificant, irredeemable fool? Am I a horrible mess of a human being? I'm not really sure why, but there are times when I feel like I am. There are times when I think that is all I am, but it's during those times that I would find other things, like the world and other people's ways of lives, to be so beautiful and fantastic. I would think, they're so dear to me that I want to know more and more about them, and I have a feeling that I travel for that purpose. And then, another brief pause before carrying on. I think if I keep on traveling, I'll surely be faced with plenty of sadness and suffering, all the way to the end. But even so, I still don't think I want to stop. I enjoy doing it, so much that even if it's necessary to hurt or kill others, I would still want to go on. Besides, I can stop any time. And that's why I want to keep going, I think. The first voice spoke with clarity. Then a question followed. Did that make any sense? Honestly speaking, I don't really get it. The other voice gave a response. That's also fine, I guess. It is. It's possible that I don't really get it myself either. Maybe I'm losing my way. Maybe I'll keep on traveling in order to understand it better. Well then, I'm going to sleep now. We still have a long way to go tomorrow. Good night, Hermes. Good night, Kino. In darkness, a rustling of thick cloth could be heard, ceasing before long. Chapter 1. The country where one perceives others' pain. I see you. A brown line stretched through the sea of green. It was a path of simple packed dirt, running straight eastward. All around it was knee-high grass as far as the eye can see, swaying gently as if to show passage of the wind. Near or far, not a single tree to be seen. In the middle of the road, a single motored, note, two-wheeled vehicle, refers to only ones that cannot fly, was running. A slightly dirty bag was fastened to the carrier on its rear. The motored roared an engine sound as it ran with considerable speed, but occasionally it would wane to the left or right. Each time, the rider would steer the handle in a panic, with the body slanted, straightening it back to the path. The rider had a slender figure, wearing a black jacket, waist wrapped in a thick belt. Strapped to the belt were multiple pouches, and on its backside was a hand persuader holster, note, persuaders are firearms. In this case, a handgun. Inside it was an automatic type persuader, grip pointed upwards. On the rider's right thigh was another holster, inserted in it was a revolver type hand persuader. So as to not have it slide out, its hammer was tied down by the short string that extended from the holster. The rider's hat was similar to that of an aviator's, brimmed only on its front and attached with ear flaps on its sides for protection against cold. They were held down by the band of the goggles, with the part sticking out fluttering violently in the wind. But on the contrary, the hat itself was protected from being blown away by wind pressure. Under the goggles was a youthful face. Large eyes and features gave a tough impression, but right now that face was wearing an expression of fatigue. The motorid spoke to its rider. Seriously, I don't know what you're thinking, Kino. You have food, so you should just eat. The rider, one who was referred to as Kino, replied. I can see a country right over there, wouldn't feel right to eat portable rations now. Beyond the road they were proceeding down, a vague image of a town's outer wall could be seen. Besides, survival foods are things for eating as a last resort. At that moment, the front wheel hit a bump in the road, throwing the motorid off balance once more. Kino corrected it in a panic. Sorry, Hermes. Kino throttled down slightly. The motorid, referred to as Hermes, grumbled. Great, just great. We don't even know if that country is going to have food or not. What do you plan to do if it's deserted? Well, whatever will be. Whatever will be. Will be. That's it. Reaching the outer wall, Kino brought Hermes to a standstill. In front of the rampart was a moat, with a drawbridge extending across. Noticing a small building just before the bridge, Kino dismounted. Hermes staggered immediately, making Kino realize that the kickstand had yet to be dropped down. Unable to hold Hermes up due to lack of energy, both of them collapsed to the left side just like that. Oh, the horror. To think the mighty Kino has fallen over. Now, hurry and get me up, come on. Hermes, now lying down to the side, spoke in a genuinely astounded tone. Kino immediately raised Hermes up, but stopped in the middle of the movement. What's up? Hermes asked. Kino answered in a thin voice. Hungry, no energy. And that's why I told you to eat when you're supposed to listen up, Kino. I already told you many times that riding motoreds is a sport. Not on the level of bicycles, but quite a lot of your energy will be drained just by riding along. You'll run out of strength before you know it, and your mind will go all numb. When that happens, you won't even be able to do normally mundane tasks. As a result, you'll easily make mistakes which leads to accidents. Hello? Kino, you listening? There was nobody in the building. Instead, a large vending machine-like apparatus was there. It activated the moment Kino entered, asking several simple questions, then almost immediately granting clearance to enter the country. The drawbridge lowered. Now that was quick. Hermes leaned on the kickstand, said as Kino returned. It's strange. Kino mounted and started the engine. What is? There wasn't a single person in there. Just a machine. Kino took off with Hermes, crossing the bridge. Maybe we won't be seeing anyone when we get into town either. Hermes said, meaning it as a joke. But those words proved to be true. You ate? Yup. Kino answered with satisfaction, returning to Hermes who had been parked in front of the building. Anyone in there? No one. Kino gave a short response, mounted Hermes, then looked around. There was a single paved road, with several one-story buildings erected on both sides. The building Kino just came out from had a sign saying restaurant. Along the roadside were spacious walkways, with streetlights and trees lined uniformly. Slightly ahead is a crossroad, complete with traffic lights. The path ran straight. Beyond it is a forest. There was nothing but green to be seen. To their backs was the country's wall they had just passed through, its ends in either direction unseen. Even by looking from here, one would know that the town was extremely large and flat. No one was in there, but you were served food just fine? Yeah. The machines took care of everything. Food was delicious, too. Man, this place is strange. A short time before, when Kino and Hermes first entered the country, there was no one there. The town was elegant, its roads well maintained. However, humans were nowhere to be seen. It was then that a car approached, stopping in front of Kino and Hermes. The door opened, but no one came out of it. Instead, another machine appeared, and after saying its welcomes to the town's visitors, presented them with a map of the country. As Kino accepted it, the car closed its door and drove off. First of all, Kino looked for a place to get food. Spotting a restaurant nearby, Kino entered alone and found no one in there either. But the interior was spacious and kept thoroughly clean. What came to Kino's reception was a machine comprising of a computer with an arm attached, placed on a wheelchair. It also took the orders. Kino ordered a menu that resembled spaghetti, a steak of some unknown meat, and some fruit with a never-before-seen color. After a while, a machine brought out the food, and so Kino ate. The money was then paid to another machine. The price was ridiculously cheap. Then, while exiting, a machine also came to see its customer off. Looking at an information board nearby, Kino searched for a place to refuel Hermes. As ever, they saw no one. Although they did come across another vehicle on the way, when they caught up, it turned out to be an unmanned garbage truck. At a deserted gas station, Kino filled Hermes's tank. It cost next to nothing. They then searched for a hotel. When they got to one, no one was there either. The hotel was extravagant, kept thoroughly clean both in and out, its marble hall shining brilliantly. The machine enshrined on the front desk handled all businesses briskly. The price was also cheap here. Kino pushed Hermes into their room. Never before had Kino ever seen a room this magnificent. Kino asked the guide machine if this was the right room, whether or not there was a mistake in rank, if it knew that its customer wasn't a king. And had it acknowledged that the price won't be paid if they were to demand a large sum of payment later, confirming the answers over and over again. Damn cheapskate. Hermes said, absent-mindedly. Kino took a shower in the unnecessarily spacious bathroom, then got a change of underwear and shirt. Initially intending to do laundry, Kino then noticed that the hotel also had a washing service, and decided to try them out. As expected, a machine came to take the clothes and said it will be done by tomorrow morning before leaving. Kino and Hermes then took the map they had received earlier and spread it out on the carpet. The hotel they're currently in is located in the area designated as East Gate Shopping District, which is the closest to the country's gate they came in from. The country was circular and boasted a size so large that they had previously rode through only a fraction of it. In the country center was a circular area colored thinly in red, designated as center. Governmental area. To the south was a fairly large lake, colored in light blue. To the country's northern outskirts was an area colored in light brown, designated as factories and research institutes. Everything else was the residential area, colored in light green. It covered no less than half of the country's area. Hey, people do live here. All these machines were created, and everything is still in perfect working order. Of course there are people here. At least it probably won't be like that place earlier, where there was only one person remaining. Then, why do you think we haven't seen anyone? Let's see, some plausible reasons are like, they can't come outside because of some religious reasons, it's a holiday, or it's their afternoon nap time. Or it might be that they just don't live around here. Meaning they're all in the residential area? Probably. Alright. Let's go check it out, Kino. Hermes' voice was raised in excitement, but Kino refused with a shake of the head. No, not today. If we go now, we won't get back before sunset. I don't want to ride at night, even while in town. Besides, I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep. What? Normally you'd still be up around this time. While Hermes was saying that, Kino unholstered the persuaders, held him in the jacket in hand, and walked unsteadily toward the bed. I normally am, sure, but you see, Hermes, when I see a clean bed, I just can't help but want to lay down. That, and I'm also starting to feel sleepy. Saying just that, Kino draped the jacket across the bed's foot and tucked the persuaders under the pillow. Crashing onto the fluffy comforter, Kino muttered such bliss and immediately fell asleep. Damn cheapskate. Hermes said, absent-mindedly. The next day, Kino woke at the break of dawn. In the room's mailbox was the laundry that had been sent off yesterday. All of them were as good as new. Kino then started the maintenance of both hand persuaders. The semi-automatic persuader holstered to the hip belt's backside, Kino called it Woodsman. Utilizing .22 LR bullets, it was a persuader of thin silhouette. The bullets may not hold significant destructive force, but the long barrel and moderate weight gave it good aiming precision. Kino removed the bullets from the Woodsman's magazine, fitted them into another magazine, then reloaded. The persuader holstered to its owner's thigh, nicknamed Cannon, was a single-action revolver. By single action, it meant the hammer had to be cocked with each shot. Ones that are shot by just pulling the trigger were called double action. Cannon did not use a magazine. Instead, gunpowder and bullets were loaded directly into the cylinder. Therefore, reloading it would have to involve inserting into each chamber the gunpowder, bullets, and placing percussion caps, all by hand. The percussion caps were inserted with a small amount of gunpowder. They were to be placed on the back of the cylinder and would ignite when struck by the hammer. Kino exchanged the cannon's loaded cylinder for an empty one and practiced quick draw again and again. After that, Kino took a shower. Going to the restaurant near the lobby, a buffet-style meal had been prepared, laid out on the tables for Kino alone. A machine prepared its frying pan, stating that it could make any kind of omelet. Before all else, Kino made sure to confirm whether or not the meal was included in the hotel fee. After eating as if it was a whole day's filling, Kino returned to the room and rested a while to let the food digest. Then, when the sun had risen high, Kino knocked Hermes awake. All of the luggage were loaded onto Hermes, and they were checked out of the hotel. Following the map, they headed for the residential area. The residential area was more or less a forest. It was densely packed with thick trees, with several streams running through. Birdsong echoed throughout, and the moderate moisture gave a refreshing feel to the air. Kino rode Hermes down a narrow, unpaved road. Every so often, they would come across houses. All were of the same style. A sprawling one-story house, it was as if they had been built to be hidden in the forest. They were uniformly located at a considerable distance from their neighbors. For a while, Kino and Hermes headed down the forest road to see if they would meet anybody. But they met no one. Kino then parked Hermes at a spot where the houses could be seen. Abandoned houses would surely have a cold ambience to them, but that was not the case for the ones here. They felt warm and lived in, just like houses found in any other country. They kept watch for a while, but no signs of people were seen. As it would be rude to stay there for an extended period of time, Kino and Hermes took off. Not finding any sign of people in the end, they got out of there and made for the center of town, designated center. Governmental area. The scene shifted from forest to buildings, the road widened and paved. As ever, they saw no one. Although they went after a moving vehicle, but once again, it turned out to be an unmanned garbage truck. Kino and Hermes entered one of the tall buildings. They took the elevator up to the top floor and were brought to an observation deck where one could see all in the country's circumference. While on the observation deck, kept thoroughly clean and devoid of people, Kino and Hermes surveyed the town. They could see a thin outline of the country's wall in the distance, and greenery spreading far and wide, all according to the map. The neighboring building also showed no signs of human life in it. Only machines of various shapes and sizes, cleaning diligently. Kino took out a sniping scope out from the luggage. As the magnification was being adjusted, the houses in the forest were being peeked into. Now that's not very admirable. Hermes grumbled. After a while. Found one. It's a person. Kino said, eyes still not taken off the scope. Really? For real? Hermes's voice raised. Yeah, one person in front of a house. An ordinary man. Exercising. There's also another person, outside a different house. A middle-aged woman. In the garden. Wonder what she's doing. She went inside. There's another house with lights on in one of the rooms. At this point, Kino had stopped peeking and put the scope back in the luggage. I told you. There are people here. The houses from before gave that impression, too. But still, how come we didn't find anybody before? Kino sat down on the observation deck's bench, then responded to Hermes's question. That, I don't know. At first, I thought they just found us travelers to be unusual or scary. But, if that were true, then you'd think they'd be meeting up with fellow residents and have fun together. This town shows no signs of them being in any kind of companionship. Absolutely no one goes outside. It's like everyone is shutting themselves away in their homes. Kino looked out the window once more. The streets were clean and well maintained. A residential area in the forest, fully in tune with nature. As a country, this one was by far the best Kino had seen in terms of functionality. I wonder why? Kino murmured. After that, Kino and Hermes headed for the factories and research institutes area, then had a tour through a fully automated factory. The guide, who gave thorough explanations, was a machine, as expected. Kino asked the machine why they never met anyone in this country, but it did not give an answer. In the evening, before it got dark, Kino and Hermes returned to the hotel they had stayed at the previous night. They could have looked for a different hotel, but Kino insisted on returning all the way to the East Gate because the breakfast was delicious. They met no one on the way. The next morning, Kino ate to the point of being fully stuffed. After filling up Hermes's tank and stocking up on portable rations, the two made their way through the town, headed west. The intention was to leave the country through its west gate. The sound of Hermes's engine echoed through the morning forest. Kino didn't want to make too much noise in the residential area, but it simply couldn't be helped. The engine spinning was kept as quiet as possible as they rode along. Reaching a gentle slope in the forest, Kino cut Hermes's engine at the top, descending the hill road as it is. Each time a house was seen, Kino would peer at it to see if there was anyone, but there was never anyone to be seen. They reached the slope's bottom after a while, and Hermes was carried slightly further by the momentum before coming to a stop. Kino was about to start Hermes's engine up once more. It was then that a clunking sound could be heard, and so Kino looked around. A short distance away from the road was a neat patch of grass, seemingly part of a house's garden. One man sat there, tinkering with a machine. As his concentration was on repairing the machine, he hadn't noticed Kino and Hermes. Hermes whispered. Ooh. It's the first time we've seen a person here up close. As if a rare animal had been discovered. Kino pushed Hermes along and approached quietly, then called out to the man. Good morning. Yue. The man sprang up in surprise, turning around to face Kino and Hermes. He was about 30 years of age and wore black-framed glasses. A bewildered expression appeared on his face, as if he had just seen a ghost. Then, he started speaking. Wah. The man spoke inarticulately. Are you all right? Sorry for startling you. Kino said. Wah. The man's words were unintelligible. And so Hermes said. Kino, I think he's speaking a different language. Formally introducing himself, maybe? Sir Wuihin? No, I don't think that's it. Yeah, too. As the man was somehow able to say just that, Hermes then said. Oh? You were right. Yeah, you two don't know what I'm thinking right now? The man suddenly exclaimed as he pointed at Kino and Hermes. Huh? Hermes gave a blunt reply. Kino's head tilted in confusion. The man then suddenly recovered from his panic attack. He calmed down, his face showing an expression of tremendous happiness, way beyond what a neutral expression would be. Raising his voice, he asked again to be sure. You two. You don't know what I'm thinking right now? No, I don't. I do understand what you are saying though. Kino said, calmly. But of course, I can't hear your thoughts either. Ah, wonderful. Wonderful. So you two are travelers? That's right. That must be it. How about having some tea together? Don't tell me you're already leaving? Please, I beg of you. We can delay our departure for a bit if you don't mind. Could you please tell us why the people in this country never leave their houses? To the question, the man nodded eagerly, then ran up to Kino and shouted. Of course. I'll tell you everything. A short way down the narrow forest road was the man's house. Kino and Hermes were led to a spacious, well-lit room. The wooden table and chairs had stylish designs. Beyond the large, curved window was a well-maintained garden in the woods. Flowers of vivid colors and several types of herb-like grasses were arranged neatly. There was no one else in the house. Nor was there any indication of anyone else having been there. Kino, coat removed, sat down on a chair. On the side was Hermes, stood up on the center stand. Here you are. The man placed a mug cup on the table. Fresh tea, planted in my very own backyard. I don't know whether it'll suit your tastes, but it's popular in this country. Kino took a whiff of its fragrance. It smells interesting. What kind of tea is it? It's called the Pisomplic tea. Hermes, hearing that, promptly shouted. Pisomplic, it's not made from some poisonous flower, is it? Might want to think twice before drinking, Kino. Kino, although without speaking up rudely like Hermes did, refrained from drinking. Peering into the mug, Kino then asked the man for confirmation. Just to be sure, is it poisonous? Will it be safe to drink if I've never had it before? The man chuckled, then went on. You two really are outsiders. Sorry for laughing. I didn't mean to mess with you. Yes, it's safe. The name is meant to signify that it blocks the poison from entering you. Ha ha ha, now that I think about it, anyone would have been weirded out if they were offered poison something tea for the first time. Besides, how do I saw why? The last word was no good. As the conversation went on, his smiling face changed not to neutral, but rather one that was on the verge of tears. In the end, he let out a cry and broke into a sob. Kino and Hermes, clueless about what had just happened, watched over the crying man for a short while. The man let his streaming tears fall, snorted once every few moments, then slowly spoke again. I wonder how many years it's been since I last held a conversation like this with other people. 10 years, maybe no, perhaps even longer. After a short while, Kino spoke up. Could you tell me your story? The man removed his glasses, wiped his tears, and blew his nose. Then, while nodding repeatedly, of course, no problem. I'll tell you all about it. Why the people of this country don't meet face to face with each other. The man wiped off the last of his tears. He then put his glasses back on and looked at Kino in the eyes. Letting out a slow breath, he then began to speak. Let's see, simply put, in this country, we all perceive other people's pain. That's why we all don't meet face to face with each other. No, I meant, we can't. Perceiving other people's pain? What's up with that? The man took a sip of his tea. You too, have your parents ever said something along these lines to you before? To grow up to be a person that understands other people's pain, such that you would know what others dislike and that you wouldn't do things that would hurt them. Or, have you ever thought something like this before? That it would surely be so wonderfully convenient to know what others are thinking? Yes, I have. Just when we were on the way here, when Kino was G's. To the man's question, Hermes pounced on the opportunity to answer. It happened so fast that Kino wasn't given any chance to make a statement. Sorry about that, Hermes. Kino spoke in a disinterested tone, as if to cover up Hermes's remark. The people of this country believed it in earnest. Right from the olden days, it's the machines that do most of the work in this country, enabling the people to live in comfort. Food was abundant, the country, safe and affluent. Because of that, the people ended up having more free time than they could imagine, so they turned to using their brains to challenge various things. Things like discovering new formulae, going full blast on scientific pursuits, creating works of literature and music. Then on one occasion, a group of physicians who were studying the human brain made a certain revolutionary discovery. They discovered that if we developed the unused portions of our brains, we would be able to communicate directly with our thoughts. Directly communicating thoughts? Kino asked with a dubious expression. Hermes also asked. What's that mean? The man continued. For example, I think hello in my head. The greeting would be transmitted to people near me. It's not just the simple things though, like, when I'm sad for something, the sadness would also be immediately transmitted to people around me. Those people would comprehend my sadness, show me compassion, and together we could think up a solution. Or, as another example, a mother would be able to sense the pain and happiness of her baby, even though it can't speak. It's like telepathy, crudely speaking. I see. Kino and Hermes responded simultaneously. The people of this country praised it, calling it a wonderful discovery. With it, people would be able to mutually communicate to the bottom of each other's hearts. We would come to a deeper mutual understanding. So far, we have been communicating with an outdated method called language, one that is noisy and without any guarantee of being conveyed accurately. That was what we all thought. And so, to give all humans that ability, we searched for a way to easily develop our brains, eventually producing the medicine. We all took it. Everyone? Hermes asked, without a moment's delay. Everyone. We all wanted to stand on the same level as all the others. We wanted to evolve. We didn't want to be left behind. And sure enough, in a sense, we have evolved. What happened then? Kino unconsciously leaned forward. The man, making only a slight expression of sadness, started telling his story in an indifferent tone. From this point on, let me tell you my personal experience. I took the medicine. The next morning, when I woke up, something like "Are you getting this? Are you getting this?" jumped into my head. There was no one in the room. It was surprising to really be getting messages from someone else while we were away from each other. Of course, it doesn't mean the words "Are you getting this?" were transmitted into my head. It felt like I was thinking "Are you getting this?" myself. Right when I thought I got it. The feeling I got it too. This is amazing. Came back. Then, when I received "I'm at your door," I hurriedly went outside, and my lover at the time was standing there. The telepathic power granting was a success. We both were so happy indeed. We exchanged the feeling "I love you" countless times. Makes me want to laugh, thinking about it now. At that point, the man stopped talking for a moment and sighed. We thought we were the happiest people in the world at the time, that is. We began living together, and a few days passed. Then that one time, I saw that she was watering my herbs a little too much. And I thought, I already warned her the other day. How many times do I have to tell her until she gets it? At the same time, I intended to say "That's not it" gently. But before I could say it, she glared at me. And a reply immediately got in my head. What? How many times? Do you take me for an idiot? That's right, it got transmitted to her. The things I didn't want to convey. Getting her reply so suddenly, I thought, what's going on here? Would she have to get so mad for something like that? Then her response came, "Something like that? Something like that, huh? That thing that's a big deal to me, is it just nothing to you?" This time, a feint appeared on the man's face. It was one of self-mockery. After that, it was nothing but telepathic fights. Truth is, she's always had an inferiority complex, believing she wasn't as smart or well-educated as I was. I'd been with her for so many years without noticing it at all. Naturally, I'd never noticed that she thought I was probably aware of it. She left behind the thought "I can't stand being together with an unfeeling, cold-blooded elitist like you." And just went away. Left alone, I just stood there, dumbfounded. It's laughably outrageous. Precisely because we could mutually communicate straight to each other's hearts, we came to detest each other to the point of no redemption. But it was good that we ended with just that funny story. At the same time elsewhere, someone died in an accident. The person's thoughts while on the verge of death were transmitted to the people who rushed to help, driving them all mad. In another place, there were two politicians who'd been working together up until then, but in truth, both of them were planning on betraying the other someday. Those thoughts slipped out, and a fight to the death ensued right in the Congress. It ended up getting called off after they got hurt though. In schools, everyone exchanged answers with each other, making exams pointless. Which reminds me, there was also someone who got a lawsuit for attempted rape and public obscenity, just by approaching a young woman. Well, those kinds of things probably happened all over the place. Within just a week or so, the city fell into a state of panic. What happened after that? Kino asked. The man answered, straightforward as can be. It was then that we all finally realized how terrifying it is for us to know what others are thinking. Our own thoughts. The thoughts of others. Letting them all out in the open was no evolution. Well, coming to that realization could be an evolution in itself though, or was it just plain old progression? If one were to know the pain of others, they will be able to show compassion toward those people. People will come to hold a deeper mutual respect for each other. What a big fat lie. It amounts to nothing but loss, after all, for someone to perceive pain at times when they are not the one in pain themselves. Nor does it make pain go away from the person who is the source of such feelings. There was only a single solution to this chaos. People had to isolate themselves from each other. If we were a few dozen meters apart, far enough that we couldn't hear each other's voices, the thoughts would also not reach. I see, so that's why. Hermes spoke, seeming completely satisfied. Indeed. By then, everyone in this country ended up with pure, genuine anthropophobia, and I'm not exaggerating. But after that, and as a result of all that, machines have become even more advanced, enabling us to live in this country despite everything. That's why even now, in this forest, everyone is living alone in their houses, isolated from each other, each in our own little space, doing the things only each one of us enjoy. There have been no children born in this country for nearly 10 years now. It'll probably fall to ruin soon enough. But that'll be after I die, so there's no use in worrying about it. The man stood up and pressed a switch on the machine behind him. Music streamed forth. An electric fiddle, playing a soothing melody. Kino listened for a while, then said, "It's wonderful." Hearing that, the man faintly smiled. "It's always been a favorite of mine and so many others, 10 odd years ago. Whenever I listen to it, I would also think, when others hear this, would they be emotionally moved like I am? I used to listen to it together with my lover, too. She used to say it was good, but after everything, I was no longer sure what she truly thought of it. And now, I do wonder what you have to say, Kino, but I don't actually want to know." Having said that, he closed his eyes. After a short while, the song ended. "Well then, Kino. Maybe I shouldn't say this to a persuader expert, but be careful on the road," the man said, standing in front of the house's garage. Kino, now with hat and goggles put on, left Hermes' engine idling. Exhaust note resounded noisily. "Not at all. I'll be careful." "You too, Hermes." "Thanks. I was so happy, getting to talk to you too. I only wish I could have met you all on your first day here, but what's past is past, I guess." Saying that, the man shrugged and smiled. "Thank you for the tea. It was very good," Kino said and got on Hermes, leaned forward, and kicked away the stand. Hermes was ready to take off as the gear was shifted. But then. Wait. Can I have another word? Just one more thing," the man said, panicking. Kino stopped Hermes' engine. The surroundings fell into an abrupt silence. The moon took another step toward Kino and Hermes, then took a deep breath. If you don't mind, would you like to live here for a while? It's safe here, and aside from not meeting anyone, it's a very nice place to live in. You could settle down here and do whatever you like. And what about you, Hermes? You could also use the town as a base for your travels. Kino, if you're fine with it, you could live with me." With the man saying all that so bluntly, Kino stared at him for a while, before declining with a shake of the head. "I'm sorry, but I want to continue my journey." With Kino saying that, the man went on restlessly. That's too bad. No, I mean sorry for having said some weird stuff." "No, I'm well." He was all flustered. His face had gone all red. Saying nothing, Kino started Hermes' engine and looked at the man's face. When their eyes met as the man raised his face up, Kino smiled. The man was surprised to see that, but before long, he also made an awkward smile. He lightly waved his left hand. Still smiling, Kino's head tilted lightly. Then, facing back forward, Kino took off on Hermes. Watching the motor drive away, a certain thought came up in the man's mind. Shortly after exiting the country, Kino and Hermes were riding on a road amid the grassy field. The sun was already low in the sky, and soon it would be in Kino's eyes. "Kino, you locked eyes with that guy for a bit at the end, yeah?" Hermes suddenly asked. Was it Louvre? Where'd it even come from? To Hermes' banter, Kino replied with a bitter face. "I was thinking you'd marry him or something." With Hermes having a serious voice this time around, Kino laughed. "Nah, that's not gonna happen." "Okay, then." Having said that, Hermes went silent for a while, before muttering. "But really, someone's really gone and fallen for you. That guy has some weird tastes." The motor ran through the road in the grassy plain. After a little while, Kino suddenly spoke up, as if recalling something. "When he looked at me for the last time, I had a feeling that he was trying to tell me, with his thoughts, don't I?" "Ma'am." "And?" So I replied, "Thank you." Having said that, Kino slipped out a chuckle. "I see. But did it actually get through to him?" As Hermes asked, Kino gave a clear answer, while still smiling. "Who knows?" Chapter 2. The country of majority rule Urselfish. The carpet of grass stretched as far as the eye could see. Layers of the green, lightly undulated land overlapped each other as they disappeared toward the horizon. The vast sky was in clear blue, strewn with drifting white clouds, so vivid to the point of dazzling. In the distance, above the horizon, a cumulonimbus cloud rose like a white-walled sanctuary. The incessant cry of cicadas filled the air. The meadow had but a single road. The road could barely be acknowledged as one, being so narrow that its earth surface was hardly visible. It ran straight, with occasional iterations of sudden curves, as if they were avoiding the masses of trees. It headed due west. A single motored, note, two-wheeled vehicle, refers to only ones that cannot fly, was running down the road. The motored cleared the curves at a considerable speed. It accelerated upon entering a long, straight path, its rear wheel scattering dirt. The motored's rider wore a long, black vest. The collar was open wide, so as to let air in. A thick belt wrapped around the hips, and on its backside was a hand persuader holster, note, persuaders are firearms. In this case, a handgun. Inside it was a thin-framed hand persuader, grip pointed upwards. Another one could be seen on its wielder's right thigh. Worn under the vest was a white shirt. To keep both sleeves from flapping in the wind, several elastic bands were wrapped around them. The rider's short black hair was blown into disarray by the wind. On top of the slender, tough-looking face was a pair of silver-framed goggles with chipped-off plating. Under it, the rider's eyes glared straight ahead. Approaching a curve, the rider decelerated and leaned the motored down. Its rear wheel slid along slightly before they made it through the curve safely. The motored was one without a back seat, but rather a pipe-framed carrier. Bound on it was a large bag and a rolled-up light brown coat. The topmost part was fastened tightly, albeit crudely, by the sleeves cut off from the rider's vest, which was formerly a jacket. Under the carrier were boxes for storing additional luggage, installed to both sides of the rear wheel. As if it was gliding, the motored kept on running through the meadow. Suddenly, the rider's chin lifted up slightly. Letting go of the left handle, the hand tapped twice on the motored's gas tank, then pointed forward. "I can see it now." The rider spoke to the motored. "At long last." The motored replied. Beyond their course, the blurry outline of white city walls started coming into view. The rider opened up the throttle. "Is anyone there?" The motored's rider shouted. The goggles were removed and hung around the neck. An attempt was made to rake the windblown hair into order, which resulted in no significant change. Before the rider's eyes was an arched gate in the high walls. However, the thick doors, which should have been tightly shut, was wide open. Squinting beyond the dark gate, several stone houses could be seen. The guardhouse, which should have been stationed with persuader armed guards, showed no sign of human presence. The rider waited there for a few moments, arm raised only once to wipe off sweat on the brows. "Looks like no one's there, Kino." Instead, the motored, leaning on the kickstand, was the one that answered. "Strange." The rider, who was referred to as Kino, shouted out once more. Only the sound of the calmly drifting wind could be heard. No answer. The motored made a minimal remark. "How about we just go in? The gate's already open, after all." "That'd be unwise, Hermes. If you go into someone's house without permission, you won't be able to complain even if they shot you dead." "Sure," muttered the motored, referred to as Hermes. "But you can't get shot if there's no one there. Besides?" Kino turned to Hermes, face painted with expectations. "It's not like there's that many people who could kill you, Kino. Even if someone pulled a persuader on you from behind, you'd be able to turn and shoot first if it's the average deal. I guarantee it." "Thanks for that." Smiling wryly, Kino tapped on the right thigh persuader holster, which contained a revolver-type hand persuader. "Well, no way around it. We can't afford to stay here forever. How about we just barge in?" "Let's go with that. We're in agreement now, then. But no fighting back. If it looks like something's up, we run." "Whatever you prefer." Kino went through the gate, pushing Hermes along. "Kino, I'm sure there'd be someone if we go to the center of town. We can just ask for entrance and stay in clearance when that time comes." Hermes cracked a joke. Leaving the shadow of the gate, Kino and Hermes made their way into the town in which the walls encompassed. Camping out in the streets, feeding kindling to the bonfire, Kino made a somewhat self-mocking remark. The surroundings, pitch black, the sky, full of stars, hid away here and there by the clouds. "At least it's not your fault, Kino." Hermes stood to the side, all luggage unloaded, metallic parts twinkling with reflections of the flame. "What, so is it yours, Hermes?" Kino fired back with a joke. "No way. The residents of this country are the ones responsible. Here's a town so well built, yet no one's living in it. It's an insult to the buildings, I say." Hermes made a somewhat resentful remark. The place where Kino and Hermes set up camp was in the dead center of a large intersection. Stone-paved roads, wide enough for several cars to pass side by side, stretched neatly in all four directions. Stone buildings lined along the sides of the roads, without a single gap between them. All were 4-story tall, of identical design, and showed a splendid sense of history. However, no light radiated from any window. In the end, after having wandered around town for half the day, Kino and Hermes never managed to find a single person. There were not even signs of anyone having lived here recently. Weary of exploring abandoned buildings, they'd set up camp here, where they could keep a clear watch on their surroundings. For some reason, there was a single spot in which the stone pavement crumbled into a hole. Using gathered dry wood, which seemed to be from roadside trees, they built a fire. A ghost town, huh? Kino muttered while splitting a block of clay-like portable ration. It was then thrown into the diner's mouth. There was no indication whatsoever of it being a palatable consumption. What are we gonna do tomorrow? Hermes asked Kino, now having finished the little meal. We haven't been to all the key places yet. Let's go check them out. Might be a waste of time. That's fine, too. Kino gave a short reply, then reached into the bag and pulled out a blanket. Walking over to under the eaves of a building in a corner, Hermes and the bonfire were left behind. Sitting down on the blanket that had been spread on the sidewalk, Kino muttered, I want a comfy bed with clean sheets. My condolences. No hot water shower for you in the morning either, by the way. Oh well. Kino pulled the persuader out of the right thigh holster. A single-action revolver, one Kino referred to as cannon. Grasped in hand, its wielder crawled into the blanket and lied down. Sleeping already? Yeah, there's nothing to do. Keep watch for me. Good night, Hermes. Soon after having said that, Kino's well-ordered sleeping breath ensued. The night of the ghost town passed in silence. Audible only once in a while were murmurs of the phrase, it's so boring. The next morning, Kino woke at the break of dawn. The immediate surroundings were shrouded in mist. Kino performed some light exercises, then persuader maintenance and practice. After which came breakfast, of the same menu as the night before. When the sun appeared and the mist cleared, it was time to knock Hermes awake. What remained of the bonfire was more or less cleaned up. Then, after all the luggage had been loaded up, they left the place behind. Kino and Hermes spent half the day roamed around to places they haven't been to on the previous day. As before, they caught sight of no one. Nor was there any indication of people living there. Then came noon, when they were starting to tire of their search, Kino and Hermes arrived at a large park. Paths of white stone pavement stretched the extensive plot of green. It was wide enough that even with a motorrad, one would not be able to quickly reach the other end. Here, too, was in such a state that suggested no recent maintenance. The trees and grass were overgrown, the pond had dried up, and all of the flower beds had withered away. Kino and Hermes proceeded to the park's inner area, discovering a structure of white limestone. This is amazing. Must have taken a lot of time and money. Truly splendid. Hermes sang of praises in astonishment. Kino and Hermes were right in front of the white marble structure. One so large that Kino's field of vision saw no end of it. Its construct was nothing short of magnificence, from one end to another, from top to bottom, finely decorated. Maybe it was a palace or something. Kino muttered, while using the shirt sleeve to wipe off sweat on the forehead. The sun was at its zenith, its rays dazzling. Probably one fit for a rich king to live in. Well, can't say about the time period though. So, maybe the monarchy was abolished and they turned it into a park. I wonder if there's any guide to tell us the history around here? Kino made a somewhat sarcastic remark, to which Hermes grumbled. Oh, come on. I want to hear it too. Kino explored the building, pushing Hermes along. The interior was no less extravagant than the exterior, having halls decorated with tens of stained glass windows, bathrooms far larger than ones of the average house, and endless corridors. Except, everything was covered in dust. Having adequately inspected everything, Kino and Hermes found themselves coming out through the building's rear exit. It led to a terrace, on which the vast garden could be seen in its entirety. I see now. Hermes muttered frankly upon seeing the scene that spread before them. Kino said nothing, only leaning forward from the terrace to take a closer look. It was a graveyard. Amid the garden's greenery were simple mounds of earth, each marked as graves by thin wooden boards. In the literal sense, the garden, one that spread as far as the eye could see, was filled with lines of such graves. Thousands, or even tens of thousands, they were of an uncountable quantity. Perhaps this garden had once been the royal hunting grounds, or a relaxation spot for the town's citizens. There was no written explanation. At this point in time, it was nothing more than a vast cemetery. Kino let out a long, deep breath, then stood there to take in the scenery for a while longer. The late summer sun started its gradual wane, quietly taking away the luminance from the sky. Light rapidly diminished under the building's shadow, as if sinking into darkness. Kino, most of the people who lived here are probably dead. And those who survived must have already gone somewhere else. It's a deserted country. That might be the case. I wonder why? Who knows? Kino turned around to face Hermes, leaning on the terrace's railing. There's nothing else to gain in staying here. Let's just go to the next country. Kino denied with a light shake of the head. No. We'll stay here for the night, then leave tomorrow morning. It hasn't been 3 days yet. Hermes asked, considerably puzzled. That again? That rule of staying in each country for 3 days, is there any meaning to it? Kino smiled, albeit only faintly. A traveler I met long ago told me that it's just about the right length for a stay. Oh really? Hermes mumbled, showing little interest. Still leaning on the railing, Kino turned around only from the neck up and took another look at the graves. In a cabin near the park's entrance, Kino and Hermes woke up to face the morning of the third day. Kino rose at dawn, unchanged from the usual. So did the persuader practice and maintenance routines, which were followed by wiping the body clean with a damp cloth, then breakfast. Then, after all the luggage had been packed, Hermes was knocked awake. Vest worn on top of shirt, belt wrapped around the waist. Persuader and holster, confirmed. Kino departed for the west gate. The morning of the ghost town passed in silence, as with ones of any other town. Kino went well above the speed limit, letting the roar of Hermes's engine echo through the buildings without reservation. Right when the wall came into view, Kino could see a single agricultural tractor parked in front of the gate. The trailer on its rear piled high with fruits and vegetables. In the driver's seat sat a man with a hat pulled low over his eyes. He was around 30 years of age, wearing work clothes covered in dirt. Kino. A person. There is someone in this country. Hermes exclaimed in excitement, as if a person being there was an absurdity. Kino and Hermes approached the tractor. The man was sleeping. To Hermes's exhaust, he rose with a scowl on his face, lightly shaking his head. He opened his eyes. Then, those eyes met with Kino's. Kino cut Hermes's engine. An abrupt silence ensued. Apologies for waking you, but good morning. Hello there. Kino and Hermes said their greetings. Well, what a surprise. The man's eyes opened, wide as can be. He was now in a state of wake, his drowsiness blown off in an instant. Ah, don't tell me, you're a traveler? Give me a sec. The man jumped down from the driver's seat. He stumbled once before trotting over to Kino. Hey, a good day to you. I'm this country's resident. The only resident. Welcome to my country. Really, thanks for visiting. I'm so glad to meet you. Kino had an expression of mixed feelings in reception of such an exaggerated greeting, delivered 2 days late. And so Hermes asked. You said you're the only one in this country, mister? What in the world happened? With that, the man burst into tears, in an expression that could be either happiness or sadness. He asked Kino and Hermes. Are you two leaving soon? Any time to spare? We can leave whenever, as long as it's within today. Hearing that, the man desperately begged. Then. I'd want to explain to you two what happened in this country. You'll listen, right? Please. I beg of you. Kino glanced at Hermes, turned back to the man, then smiled and said. Yes, please do. We'd very much like to know. In front of the gate, on the first floor of a building in a corner of the plaza, was what seemed to have once been an open-air cafe, chairs and tables stacked. The man pulled the awning out across the sidewalk, then pulled out a table and some chairs. He lightly dusted off a chair and gestured for Kino to sit. Hermes stayed at Kino's side, leaning on the center stand. The man rested his elbows on the table and folded his hands beneath his chin. Now, where to begin? Well, I suppose it's got to be the monarchy and the revolution. So there was a monarchy, after all? Kino asked, and the man nodded. Right. Up until 10 years ago, that is. Then the revolution happened. Just as we thought, Kino. Looks like you two already went to the Central Park. Surely you've seen them. The man slightly clouded up in both expression and voice. Yes, we did. Went in of our own accord. Hermes replied, in a tendency of sarcasm. It's fine. Makes the story easier to tell, after all. So, those are the graves of this country's people? The man nodded several times. Yeah, but it's something that was inevitable. Was it an epidemic or something of the sort? Kino asked. The man produced out quite the sorrowful expression, saying, No, that's not it. Only a single person died of illness. Let me tell you about it, all in order. Since its founding, this country's government has always been a monarchy. A single king would reign over the land and all of its people. Among the several tens of kings we had, there were a few of admirable rule. They were beloved by the people. But the overwhelming majority were not like that, especially the bastard who took the throne 14 years ago, the lowest of them all. Maybe because he was crown prince for a very long time, he did whatever he liked the moment he became king. Those who opposed him were killed. Back then there were economic difficulties due to bad harvests, but he ignored them all, indulging in his amusements. The poor crops went on for 3 years, and most people were starving. But of course, that bastard didn't care. He probably didn't even know what the word starve means. If they have no bread, let them eat cake. As Hermes poked fun at the situation, the man grinned. Quite a good one you got there. Hermes then gave a short reply of thanks. 11 years ago, life got so difficult that a group of farmers begged the king to reduce taxes, but they were all killed. We were at the peak of our anger. We could no longer abide the king's violence. The only thing we could do about this situation was no other than to overthrow the king and the monarchy system, and so the plot for a real revolution was set in motion. At the time, I was studying literature in university. My household was relatively well off, but I felt the same pain of the poor. And so I was involved in the plotting from a fairly early stage. What if you'd been caught? To Kino's question, the man's face darkened. The death penalty, of course. Several of my friends were arrested and executed. Do you know the traditional method of execution in this country? They kill you by tying up your legs and hands, hanging you upside down, then dropping you down head first in the middle of the street. In this country, your family would be executed as well. I've seen it again and again, the public execution in the dead center of the intersection. Your friends' families are the first to be dropped. Their parents, spouses, children, one by one in order among them. Some of my friends would spot me and the others in the crowd, right before they were blindfolded. It felt like something's been cut off between us at the moment they're dropped down, and in the next, I watched their skulls and necks crack and break. One spring morning 10 years ago, our uprising finally began. First of all, we attacked the guards' armories. Of course, it was for getting our hands on persuaders and ammunition. Before then, the general population was forbidden from owning weapons, you see. It was only natural, I suppose. The worse those good-for-nothings in power are, the more they are afraid of an armed populace. Anyway, we succeeded in obtaining persuaders from each of the armories. We got some of the guards to coming over to our side as well. Then, we were supposed to rush the palace in one go and seize the king. But the plan was called off. As the man spoke up to this point, he lightly smiled. Called off? But why? Because it looked like it's going to rain? Hermes asked in surprise. This isn't like hanging out the laundry, Hermes. Kino said with a bitter face, then turned to the man. It was no longer necessary to do so, yes? Because the king ran away? The man raised his index finger and laughed delightfully. Correct. It was as you said. How do you know that, Kino? It's because the building didn't suffer any damage. I see, Hermes murmured. The king and his family, or should I say, his treasures, were hidden in the back of a truck that was headed outside the country. He was found rather quickly. Ha ha ha, well of course. Anyone would be suspicious if they saw a person buried in a pile of jewels and vegetables. And so the revolution succeeded with very few sacrifices. Now that's amazing. What's next? What happened after that? Hermes asked, as if urging the speaker on. After that, we started our new way of life, and our new way to manage our country, by creating a completely new government system. One with policies not dictated by a specific person, but agreed upon and enforced by all. Never again shall a single person rule the nation. The nation belongs to all. If someone were to have an idea, it would be made known to everyone, then there would be an investigation to measure how many approve of it. If it was approved by the majority, then the method would be put into use. The first thing we decided on was what we would do with the king whom we've captured. What was the verdict? Kino asked. The man narrowed his eyes. The results of the vote were 98% in favor of execution. The king, his followers, and their families. As I thought. Hermes mumbled. The royal family were hanged up and dropped. We thought that the age of fear and despair was over at last. After that, it was busy work. Everyone agreed upon numerous things. First up was the Constitution. The initial clause stated that the nation belonged to everyone, and all administration would take place by majority rule. Then, the tax system. Police. National defense. Judgment by law. It was so much fun when we were deciding on the educational system. Deciding on which kind of training we should give to the children, who carry the nation's future on their shoulders. It was so much fun. The man then closed his eyes. He nodded to himself several times, then opened his eyes again and looked at Kino. Kino leaned slightly forward. What happened after that? The man opened his canteen and took several drinks. He then let out a single, long breath. Everything went well for a while, then one day, suddenly came those people who said the most ridiculous thing. Their proposal went like this. It takes too much time to get a direct vote from everyone. How about we vote to select someone as a leader, then entrust him or her with management of the country for a number of years? That proposal, did it go through? As if. That'd be plain madness, nothing else to say about it. If we went with it, then what if the chosen leader turned out to be a madman? If we give all the power to one person, he'd be the one to stop him when he runs wild? Those who proposed it were probably meaning to bring back the absolute presence of a king to the country, so that they could have special privileges in life under the king's patronage. A despicable thought. Naturally, it didn't go through, opposed by the majority. So that's it. But we also came to the decision that the possession of such treacherous thoughts was in itself a danger to the country's future. All of them were charged with treason against the nation. Kino glanced at Hermes, then asked the man, "Where did that end up?" The majority deemed them guilty. And? Hermes asked. The death penalty. Death penalty for all of them. The traditional way, tied and dropped, family included? As the answer Kino's question. Oh, yes. A fitting end for those who go against the nation. The man spat those words out. But soon enough, he produced an expression of loneliness, then went on. But you see, it's unfortunate that those who oppose the nation didn't stop showing up. One time, came those who said the death penalty system should be abolished. How outrageous. If we got rid of the death penalty, we would have no choice but to leave traitors alive until who knows when. Those who would say such a thing were deemed traitors. And so, all of them later received the death penalty by vote. Another time, came those who were against our new tax system. They complained that their tax rates were too high for them to pay, and said that they're not paying. They were objecting to what's been decided by the majority rule. What arrogance, only caring about their own well-being. Of course, we couldn't let that past us. They were executed. Running a country sure is a lot of trouble. Hermes said. The man nimbly raised his index finger. It sure was. But if we don't keep a firm grip, mistakes would be made. If we end up with something we can't fix, then it'll be too late. What happened next? Kino asked. We tried our best to make this country a splendid one, in a way or another, but still, those who opposed the nation never stopped popping up. Even ones who used to so firmly hold the same beliefs as all of us, rose in our opposition, trying to lead the country down the wrong direction. It ached my heart to have to execute old comrades. However, I never let my personal feelings drive me away from what must be done. Absolutely not. And so, the graves eventually ran out? I'm afraid it's as you said. Fortunately, we had the former palace, which was turned into the central park. We began using the rear garden, which we had initially planned to use as farmland. Those who disagreed were executed. Up to now, how many executions were there? The man thought over Kino's question for a while. Who knows? If it's from a king's time, then it's too many to count. No. Just from the new government's formation is fine. Oh, 13,064. The man answered promptly. What kind of vote decided the last one? The last one was exactly a year ago. By that time, the country's population consisted of me, my beloved wife, and an unmarried man who'd been a long-time friend of mine. The three of us intended to hang on and support the country. But one day, that man announced that he was leaving the country. We tried again and again to persuade him against going. But that bastard's wicked determination was solid. To abandon your country, to abandon your duty, we couldn't forgive that. As a result of the vote, 2 against 1, it was decided that the bastard would receive the death penalty. Your wife, is she still here? The man slowly stretched his neck. No, not anymore. It's been about half a year. She died of sickness. A common cold. I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't do anything. Damn it all. Before long, the man quietly burst into tears. Thank you for telling us your story. We now understand a lot more. To the man who was sobbing with his face flat on the table, Kino bowed lightly, then said while standing up from the chair. Hermes, it's about time. With that, the man raised his head. I'm the only one left in this country. I'm so lonely. However, to do the right thing, there are times when a person must stand firm against hardships. This country must overcome the times of difficulty. Finally dried off his tears, the man made a proposal to Kino and Hermes. You two. Please become this country's residents. Then let's restore this country together. Everyone here are honored citizens. Come on, won't you agree? Kino and Hermes gave their replies almost at the same time. No, thank you. No way. For a moment, the man produced an expression of sadness and of betrayed expectations. I see. If the two of you are saying that, then it can't be helped. Then. The man gave it a little thought, then asked. It wouldn't hurt for you two to delay your leave for about a year. How about it? That's out of the question. I'm with Kino. You two please, stay for another week. You could use anything here however you'd like. I'll decline the offer. No need. 3 more days, how about we eat the finest meals together here? No thank you. We shall depart before Kino reconsiders. If you stay in this country, I'm willing to serve you for a while as a loyal slave. I'll have to refuse. I'm not into that kinda play, man. Gonk. Kino struck Hermes' tank, then frowned and waved the stinging hand. It's about time for us to leave. Sorry about your requests, but we can't accept any of them. Still, we offer our deepest gratitude for letting us hear your story. Kino bowed lightly once more. Just another day. Please, stay in this country just for one more day. Then I can tell you more about how wonderful this country is. Please. We can't afford to do so. We've already stayed for 3 days. Kino said just that, then turned to Hermes. I don't really get it either, but that's usually how we roll. Sorry about that, mister. The man looked like he was about to burst out crying once again. Then, he seemed to want to say something, but his mouth only flapped about. Let's go. As Kino said that and got on Hermes, the man reached into his bag, pulling out a hand persuader. A break-action revolver frame with juxtaposed cylinders, one capable of 16 consecutive shots. Although he pulled it out, that was all he did with it. He did not point it at Kino's back, nor did he place his index and middle fingers on its heavy trigger. So, you plan on threatening us now? Kino turned back, only in line of sight, to the man, asking him with a detached voice, while the right hand silently reached for the thigh holster. For a moment, the man looked down at his persuader, the one held in both his hands. Then, in a struggle, he shook his head repeatedly. No, I can't. If I use it, then I'll be the same as that fool of a king and his followers. It's wrong to use violence to force your thinking on others. It's wrong. A fool solution. I can't. That's right, everything must be chosen by desire of the majority. The paths we take must be peacefully decided by the consensus. It is the only way, so that the fatal mistakes of our past would not recur. Isn't that right? Listlessly, the man lowered his persuader. As he broke it open, it was apparent that not one bullet had been loaded. Kino turned around, smiled only slightly, then said, Are you sure about asking us that? What if Hermes and I said that's not right? You're mistaken, then what would you do about it? Taken aback, the man dropped his persuader to the ground. Simultaneously with the resonance of a crack, the man's face turned pale. He trembled so hard that his teeth rattled. Shortly after, he squeezed out all the courage in his being, shouting at the top of his lungs. Gee, go away. People like you can go away for all I care. Disappear. Get out of this country. Be gone. And never come back again. We'll do just that. Sure thing. Kino got on Hermes and started the engine. The noisy engine roared. Let's run for it. Kino whispered, then took off with Hermes. While on the run, the words that Hermes uttered were, Farewell, Your Majesty. The man never heard it. The man watched as the Matorid ran off, until he could not see it any longer. In his hand was his persuader, fully loaded just now. He gripped it tight, ready to fire at any time. The man screamed, You bastards. I swear if you come back, I'll shoot. I'll kill you. He continued to glare in the Matorid's direction, even though it was long out of sight. The travelers never returned. The Matorid ran down the meadow path for a while, then came to a stop. Kino, goggles taken off, looked at what laid ahead. A fork in the road. Stepping away from Hermes, Kino confirmed their orientations with a compass. One road headed due west-southwest, the other west-northwest, both stretched endlessly. Nothing but the horizon could be seen beyond the vast grassland. Which way should we go? Hermes asked. Kino looked at the map, one that was self-drawn by hand, and marked with only the most important routes, then mumbled with curiosity. Strange, there was supposed to be only one road. Who told you that? That merchant from a while back. You know, the one who brought along pandas and kangaroos. As Kino said so, Hermes poked back in a playful tone. Aha, looks like you've been fooled. You're such a sucker, Kino. No, the directions were all matched up until now. Heading west from that last country, we should come across a lake with purple water, and then we should reach a large city-state. One of these two have got to be right. Having said that, Kino took another look at the roads. The right, I guess. It's wide. The left, probably. The dirt is harder. Kino and Hermes said, both at the same time. And fell silent, both at the same time. A short while later, Kino spoke up. Got it. Let's go left. Huh? What do you mean, huh? Hermes answered the question frankly. It's because you decided on a road so quickly this time, Kino. Normally you dither about until you get hungry. What kind of wind blew to turn you over a new beef? New leaf? Yeah, that. Having said that, Hermes fell silent for a moment, then, well? Kino groaned. Well, sticking around here will diminish our supplies, so I thought it'd be best to just go with one. Besides, it's hot. And you'd rather be running, wouldn't you, Hermes? That's true, but what if it turned out to be the wrong way? Hermes said, feeling quite uneasy. Kino gazed into the distance. Let's see if we don't find a lake after running for a while, or if the road changed its direction along the way, then we'll come back here. We'll ask for directions if we're lucky to meet someone. Don't knock it till you've tried it, I see. Idea approved. Let's go with it. With Hermes saying that, Kino affirmed the agreement, put away the map and compass, strapped on the goggles, and mounted on Hermes. Kino then took off with Hermes. Down the right path. Kino. You tricked me. Hermes screamed. That's not true. I didn't mean to trick you. Don't knock it till you've tried it, right? So it doesn't matter which one we try first, does it? Now that's no fair. That's still no reason to go right. Disregarding Hermes' justified protests, Kino accelerated even further. Chapter 3. 3 men on the rails on the rails. The forest was one full of giant trees. With trunks as thick as double beds, they stood tall like pillars of a shrine, except that they were scattered around without any sense of regularity. If one were to look up, they would see nothing but the color green. The lowest branches and leaves were 20 meters above ground, completely obscuring the sky. Since no more than the dimmest sunlight ever hit the ground, no grass grew on any surface. The black, damp, bare earth spread forth endlessly. It was a world of glaring unnatural contrast between black and green, created by nature itself. I don't really like riding in the woods. Do you know why, Hermes? The speaker, standing beside one of the giant trees, had short hair and was 15 to 16 years of age. The person was of slender figure, wearing a black jacket with a belt wrapped around the hips. For such a thin waist, the belt was a thick one. On the hip's backside and the right thigh were holsters. Inside them, persuaders, note. Persuaders are firearms. In this case, handguns were kept in place. Right to the side was a single motored, note. Two-wheeled vehicle. Refers to only ones that cannot fly, leaning on its center stand. One without a rear seat, but rather a carrier. Bound on it was a somewhat dirty bag. Its engine was still active, its rear wheel left spinning idly. Is it the hairy caterpillars, Kino? The motored, referred to as Hermes, replied. That's not it. Well, that's one thing. The main thing is, it's easy to lose your sense of direction in a forest. You might think you're heading west, but before you know it, you ended up heading south. Not seeing the sun also makes it more difficult. Said the person, referred to as Kino, while putting on a hat with a small visor and flaps that covered both ears. Sense of direction, huh? That's right, Hermes. If we head due north, we'll be out of this forest of giant trees. Then, we should come across a road. Should, huh? Kino took out a compass from the chest pocket, stepped away from Hermes, and confirmed the direction of north. Let's go. Kino looked back once more to confirm that nothing was left behind. And also to confirm that the luggage fastened to Hermes, and the coat tied on top of them all, did not fall off. With gloves fitted back on, Kino mounted on Hermes and leaned forward, then kicked up the stand. At the same time, the clutch was squeezed. The brakes were checked by running ahead for a short while. Lastly, the goggles were strapped on. Kino took off on Hermes. Then, after going ahead only a short distance, they stopped. Kino got down from Hermes, stepped away shortly, then confirmed their bearings with the compass. Kino then jumped back on, ran ahead for a short while, stopped, stepped away shortly, and confirmed the direction. The same process repeated over and over. Gah, what a drag. Even while complaining as such, Kino never cut any corners in the process. It was done with great precision. Your efforts are much appreciated. Running onward after finishing the 108th direction check, amid the black and green, Kino noticed a white line in the direction they were headed towards. Before long, it widened vertically, becoming a radiant band of light. Kino throttled down the speed. At the same time, when the rider's eyes were adjusted to the brightness, the Meteorid went past the last giant tree, at last leaving the forest. At the north end of the forest, there was no road. What appeared before Kino was none other than an ordinary, overgrown, dense jungle. Nope, no road. Did we go the wrong way? Hermes grumbled. No. We'll probably be fine. Look. Kino signaled Hermes to look downwards. Amid the overgrown grass, a reddish-brown strip of something thin could be seen. A short space apart from it was another one. Lined side by side like that, they must be rails. Railway tracks. Correct. Kicking the ground, Kino slowly pushed Hermes backwards. When the person who gave us the directions said, "A meteoroid will make it. You'll reach a wide path soon enough, this must be it. People must be using it as a path through the jungle." So that's it. But won't there be trains coming through? The grass is way overgrown, and the rails are all rusty. I don't think it's in use anymore. High up. Kino lifted Hermes's front wheel up, rolling in between the rails, faced west. Looking at it more closely, the grass was neatly lined along the tracks, as if it was a green road through the jungle. Well, this is nice. At least we don't have to worry about losing our sense of direction now, eh, Kino? Kino nodded before taking off on Hermes. So as to not have the front wheels trip on the rails, the run was a cautious one. The speed was not raised above the moderate level. Trampling over the robust grass, Kino and Hermes ran onwards. By the time the sun rose up to its zenith, they encountered the first man. It was Hermes who first noticed him. Just as they cleared a curve in the jungle, Hermes signaled. "Someone's ahead." Seeing a person's figure in the distance straight ahead, Kino applied the brakes. As they slowly approached, the man could be seen crouching down, preoccupied with something. He looked up for only a moment. Parked behind him was a cart fitted with train wheels, fully loaded with cargo. Kino stopped Hermes just in front of the man, cut the engine, and dismounted. "Hello." Greeted by Kino, the man stood up. He was of old age and short stature. His face was of finely chiseled, albeit wrinkled, features. He possessed small, gray eyes. His long hair was almost entirely white, his beard and mustache had been left untrimmed. He wore a small, black hat. His worn-out clothes of the same black were patched up here and there, but it was apparent that the shirt and trousers were once fine pieces of craft. "Greetings, traveler." The old man said just that. Kino intended to spark further conversation with the old man, but noticed something before then. "Ah!" and exclaimed in considerable surprise. Hermes also noticed it at about the same time, and was rendered speechless. The old man slowly turned around to look at what Kino and Hermes were looking at. He then looked back at the young ones, who were now looking at him, speaking to them nonchalantly. "Yep. I did all that." Kino looked at the old man for a moment, then took another look at what he claimed to have done and blurted out. "Unbelievable." What laid beyond Kino and Hermes's sights were rails. But unlike the way they came, not one blade of grass grew in the opposite direction. Crossed eyes could be seen lining up in a frighteningly uniform interval, neatly blanketing the gravel. The twin lines of metal were shining, as if they'd just been delivered from the foundry. Touched by the sunlight, they gained a brilliant black luster on both their tops and sides. They stretched away as far as Kino's eyes could see. "Sorry, but it's not easy to remove the cart. Really sorry about that, traveler. Could you take your meteoroid friend off the rails for a moment?" "Huh? Ah, yes. I certainly can," Kino said, flustered. The old man crouched down again, and Kino approached him, bowing down and asked. "Excuse me, but there's something I'd like to ask. Would you mind?" "What is it?" "As long as it's something I know." Did you pull the grass and polish the rails, all by yourself?" Kino asked, pointing at the rails behind the old man. "Yep. It's my job, after all," the old man said, making no fuss of it. "Job, you say?" "That's right. Been doing this since forever." While saying so, the old man plucked off the grass at his feet. Kino looked at the cart. The cargo loaded on it seemed to be supplies for the old man's necessities. Then, after looking back at Hermes, Kino brought up a question which the meteoroid would likely want answered. "By forever, how long do you suppose it's been?" 50 years, I reckon," the old man answered, absent-mindedly. 50 years? Hermes exclaimed, asking for confirmation. "Don't know how long exactly, but that ought to be about right. I only counted the winters, you see." "All those 50 years, you've been doing nothing but working on the rails?" Kino asked. Yep. Joined the railroad company when I was 18. They said they had a railroad that wasn't being used now, but might be used again soon, and told me to polish as much of them as I could. They haven't told me to stop yet, so I'm keeping at it." "You've never gone back to your hometown?" "Nope. At the time, I've got a wife and child. Gotta make sure they've got enough to eat, no matter what's necessary. Wonder how they're doing right now. Should be getting my wages though. So they ought to not be having trouble with their livelihood, at least." Kino and Hermes just stood there, not saying anything. "So, where are you headed to, traveler?" The old man asked, making no fuss of it. The Madrid ran between two shining rails. Kino and Hermes had been on the move since sunrise. Only when they came across a streamlet did they stop, to rest and to draw water. The rails stretched onward through the jungle, winding around gently. The gray gravel created a path, guiding Kino and Hermes on their way. "We owe a lot to that old man yesterday, eh?" Hermes said, for the umpteenth time in this day alone. Thanks to the rails that had been polished so thoroughly that they reflected the sky, and the fact that the grass had been all plucked off, their run had been far easier compared to that of the past day. Amid the crossed-eyes' systematic vibrations, Kino and Hermes ran onwards. By the time Kino had begun to feel hungry, they encountered the second man. It was Kino who first noticed him. Just as they cleared a fairly abrupt curve, Kino suddenly applied the brakes. Hermes then noticed the man, who was beside the cart parked atop the rails. Turning around in surprise, the man leaned his pole tool on the cart, then spread his hands out as a gesture to stop. Kino stopped Hermes just in front of the man, cut the engine, and dismounted. "Hello." Kino bowed lightly. "Ah, hello, traveler." The man was of old age. He was taller than Kino, with a frame so thin to the point of being gangly. Little facial hair grew above his mouth. A hat was placed loosely on his bald head. He wore clothes of matching black, the same type as the old man from the previous day. This one, too, was patched up here and there. Kino intended to spark further conversation with the old man. But it was then that Hermes noticed something and cried out. "Kino! The rails!" "The rails?" Kino wondered what was up. Body slanted slightly to look past the cart, Kino soon realized that the shining rails had been cut short. No cross ties either. Only gravel stretched onward through the jungle. "The rails are all gone." "Right. I tore them off," the old man answered to Kino's mutters. Then, while Kino was still standing there dumbfounded, he went on. "The cart doesn't come off the rails, I'm afraid. Sorry, but I have to ask you to go around." Having said that, the old man picked up his long iron rod, which was bent only slightly at its tips. He then moved behind the cart, which was fully loaded with cargo. Kino promptly started Hermes's engine, rode over the rails, and also went around the cart. The old man wedged the bent tip of his rod under one side of the rails. Then, NGH. Together with a grunt, he applied weight onto the rod. A section of the rail disconnected, tumbling down beside the raised gravel mound. As Kino looked more closely, there were other pieces of the rail, which had been torn off prior, lying around up ahead. They possessed no shine, covered up in the jungle's red soil. The old man tore the other side of the rail off as well. "There's something I'd like to ask," Kino asked. The old man turned towards Kino. Why are you tearing off the rails?" "It's my job, you see. Been doing this all by myself since forever. I'm clearing off the cross ties, too." Hermes whispered so that only Kino would hear. "I have a bad feeling about this." "By forever. How long do you suppose it's been?" 50 years, was it? I'm not really sure. I joined the railroad company when I was 16. They said they had a railroad that they're not going to use anymore, and ordered me to tear them up. It was my first job, so I came in doing it with high spirits. They haven't told me to stop yet though. "You've never gone home?" Hermes asked. "Right. I've got 5 little brothers, you see. Got to earn money to feed them. I can't afford to take a vacation." "Is that so?" After having said that, Kino casually followed up with a question. "These rails sure are clean for ones not used in a long time, don't you think?" The old man replied. "Right, always have been. Strange stuff. Still, it makes them easier to take off." Kino and Hermes just stood there, not saying anything. "So, where are you headed to, traveler?" the old man asked, quietly. The Madrid ran on the gray path of gravel. Kino and Hermes had been on the move since sunrise. They almost never took a break. The road that stretched onward through the jungle was relatively straight. Scattered about to its sides were torn off rails and dismantled cross ties. There were also occasional piles of rail spikes. "It's hard to drive," Kino said, for the umpteenth time in this day alone. The tire's grip was no good on the gravel road without cross ties, slipping even with the slightest slant through a curve. Kino kept their speed to a minimum and maintained a nervous grip on the handles. By the time Hermes was about to propose that they took a break, they encountered the third man. Kino and Hermes noticed him at the same time. Beyond the straight gravel path, the figure of a person could be seen. As Kino promptly eased up the accelerator, Hermes said nothing. They slowly approached the man sitting on the gravel, apparently resting. As he noticed Kino and Hermes, he waved his hand to them. Kino stopped Hermes just in front of the man, cut the engine, and dismounted. Hello. Hey there, traveler. The man gave his reply while standing up. The man was of old age, but still robust. His torso was bare, and his arms and shoulders rippled with muscle. If one didn't see the wrinkles carved into his face, he could have even said that he was middle-aged, still in the prime of his life. He wore a pair of black trousers, the same as the old men from yesterday and the day before. The hems were quite worn out. Kino intended to spark further conversation with the old man. But it was then that both Kino and Hermes noticed something at the same time. The rails are still there. The rails are still there. They muttered simultaneously. Behind the old man was a cart fully loaded with cargo. The rail started from that point, stretching onward through the jungle. Hefting a massive hammer that had been lying on the ground beside him, the man said cheerily. Yup. I did that. You're replacing them? Replacing them, yeah. So that the train can run through? Laying down the cross ties, placing the rails, and hammering down the spikes. All by yourself? Hermes asked. Now, it's nothing once you've gotten used to it. I have all the materials right here. Here, here, and here. The old man pointed at the cross ties, rails, and spikes scattered about. I have a really bad feeling about this. Hermes whispered. Kino then asked. Is this your job? Of course. Been since forever. The man answered, laughing. By forever, you suppose. Give or take a few, I'd say 50 years. I'm pretty bad at maths, you see. I got the job at the railroad company when I was 15, I think. They said they had a railroad that they might be using again, and they're relying on me to restore it. They haven't told me to stop yet, so I'm keeping at it. I take it that you've never gone back to your hometown? Kino asked, as if wanting to confirm something. Well, yeah. My parents were sick, you see. They couldn't work, so I've got to earn enough for 3. Is that so? After Kino said that, Hermes spoke up casually. Keep up the good work, yeah? Will do. Thanks. Not saying anything more, Kino started Hermes's engine. So, where are you headed to, traveler? The old man asked, smiling and laughing. Chapter 4. The Colosseum Avengers. A road cut in between the forest and the river. The thick woods was completely separated from the clear waters. Here, the river's leave doubled as a road. It was on a slightly higher altitude compared to the river, and considerably higher compared to the forest. The road's dirt was hard, mostly flat, and quite wide. It seemed to be quite regularly traversed through by wheeled vehicles. However, right now, only a single motored, note, two-wheeled vehicle, refers to only ones that cannot fly, was dashing down the path with extreme speed. The motored's rider faced away from the dazzling sun, which had just risen up from the horizon. Their shadows stretched extensively toward the direction they were headed. The rider was of slender figure, the shadow, long and thin. Wearing a light brown long coat, the excess length was wrapped around both thighs. Worn on the head was a hat with a small visor. It resembled that of an aviator's, and also of military uniforms. So as to not have it be blown away by wind pressure, the ear flaps were tied way down to the chin. The rider also wore a pair of goggles, one of silver frame with chipped-off plating. The damp morning forest air buffeted the slender, tough-looking face. What a nice road. But you're going way too fast. The motored shouted to its rider. What are you saying? Have you grown senile all of a sudden, Hermes? The rider shouted back, not at all easing on the acceleration. Cranked up to top gear, even. The motored engine roared so loudly that one would think the muffler was missing, and the vibration was so violent that one would fear some parts were broken. The motored was one without a back seat, but rather a carrier. Bound on it were a large bag and a rolled-up blanket. Additionally, boxes for storing additional luggage was installed to both its sides, making it quite heavily equipped. All of those things clattered as the motored raced forth with extreme speed. A small silver cup, tied to a net, wobbled around intensely. The road had occasional gentle bumps. The driver rushed onward without dropping the speed, and the motored was airborne. The lump of metal leapt, sailed through the air for several meters, and landed with a thud. Jaya! The motored, referred to as Hermes, screamed. Up to this point, the rider finally eased up the accelerator. The speed was dropped to about half of what it was at before, and the rider spoke up in a tone of uncontainable excitement. Whoa there, Hermes. Do you all right? Hermes replied, sounding quite resentful. Don't you all right? Me, Kino. I thought my frame was going to break apart. The rider, referred to as Kino, shifted the gear down one level and spoke up carelessly. It's fine, I'm not breaking anything. That aside, we hit 100 back there. Been a while since we last done that. While loaded up like this, no less. Be proud, Hermes. Get this, Kino? For a meteorid, top speed would obviously mean the speed at which it breaks apart. Hermes rebutted, in a compassed manner. Likely snapped out of the trance of excitement, Kino proceeded to speak in a calmer tone, left hand reaching down to lightly tap on the meteorid's tank twice. Sorry about that, Hermes. What are you even rushing for? Now, it's important that you use your abilities to the fullest once in a while. Otherwise your skill will grow dull before you even know it. Oh, is that so? Hermes said in a monotone recitation, not at all impressed. That's right. Oh, and we'll be at the next country soon. I don't really have faith in your soon, Kino. To Hermes's grumbles, Kino said, left hand pointed forward. Look, over there. Beyond where Kino was pointing at was a gentle downward slope, and beyond it were city walls. The terrain was a shallow basin, with a gray wall amid a dark green forest encircling the city. The buildings inside stood in a disarray, and an enormous elliptical structure could be seen in the center. I've been wanting to visit this place for a while now. An expression of fascination was painted on Kino's face. In a manner that suggested absolutely no interest, both in Kino and the country they're headed towards, Hermes muttered. Once we get there, I want to rest in some place dark, cool, and in just the right level of humidity. What was that? Kino, coat still on, loudly repeated the question. And so the gatekeeper, a young soldier, replied. I'll say it as many times as you like. You've entered the country. Which means you're automatically considered an eligible participant. 'Tis a set policy. Kino, with a mixed face of astonishment and disgust, asked on. So, you're telling me I have to take part in that contest? That's right, boy. You came to this country without knowing that or what? The soldier said, in a manner as if taking Kino for a complete idiot. Face painted with an outward expression of indignance, Kino said in a powerful tone. Could you please stop calling me boy? I'm Kino. Oh, whatever. But you're participating, and that's final. Do you know what'll happen if you don't? The soldier asked with a grin. How am I supposed to know? As Kino said so, the soldier delightfully continued. Then I'll tell you. You'll live the rest of your life here as a slave. Branded as a coward who refused to fight and ran away, that is. What's up with that? Isn't that obvious? It's the law of this country. Break it, and you get the death penalty. Kino and Hermes who just went through the procedures to enter the country which they arrived at the gate of. When that was over, the gatekeeping soldier said, your number is 24. With Kino being clueless as to what that meant, the soldier began his explanations with a look of exasperation. In this country, once every 3 months, a contest was held for the rights of citizenship. Those who wished to live in the country would have to do battle in the Colosseum, and the sole victor who made it to the end would be made citizen. The contests were held over the course of 3 days. The opening day, which happened to be today, was host to the first and second rounds. The third and fourth would then commence tomorrow. And finally, on the third day, the final round would commence at noon. Participants were given free rein in choosing the weapons they employed. The spectation of others' battles were forbidden, however. Either side could offer to surrender, but only when the opponent accepted it would the capitulation be effective. Otherwise, whomever was immobilized first would be deemed the loser. In most cases here, being immobilized would be synonymous to being killed. If one intended to flee from the contest, they would be charged with cowardice under fire and executed on sight. Almost all the residents of the country crowded into the Colosseum to watch the contest. Naturally, the king would also be spectating from his private seat. All spectators had absolutely no rights of complaint if they were hit by stray bullets and were injured or killed. The king would grant a medal of citizenship personally to the last one standing. At that time, they would also be permitted to add one new law to the country. It could be anything and everything, as long as it did not contradict any other law that had been there prior. Although this might give the impression that the citizens were actually involved in the country's administrations, it was practically a mere reward. Up to now, the victors would only add laws to satisfy their selfish desires, such as from this moment forth, there shall not be a time when I do not have a house to live in. With all that said and done, today was the last day of reception. Those who have passed through the gate up until now, no matter who, now were automatically considered eligible participants of the contest. So what'll it be? Do you in? Or is it straight to the slave shed, Lil Kino? If you choose slavery, then you'll be the very first one, you know. The soldier said. And while that was going on, the other soldiers, one seemingly with free time on their hands, had gathered around. Each of them had a condescending sneer painted on their faces. As if to show off, they rattled their persuaders, note, firearms, to the point of being excessive. Since when did this event begin? Kino asked the original soldier, disregarding all of the others. Around 7 years ago. But really, you shouldn't call it just an event. What do you take the glorious rights of citizenship for? Glorious rights of citizenship, you say? Kino glared at the soldier once more. I was told that this country was surrounded by greeneries, with forests and fields that provided plenty. And that the people who lived here were modest and led simple, splendid lives. From the back, another soldier came forward and interrupted. Hey, that's still true. Don't just go ahead and write your own history like that. There's plenty to eat even if you don't work. It's what you would call a paradise on the mortal realm. Would be a waste if the likes of you were to get in. Keeping a perfectly calm tone, Kino directed a question toward everyone present. So what happened 7 years ago? The young soldier turned to his compatriots, tilting his head and shrugging his shoulders, as if asking what he should be doing. One among the crowd, a middle-aged soldier, stepped forward and offered to specially educate the traveler on the subject. The king was succeeded. 7 years ago, His Majesty the current king killed off the boring former king, making this country that much more exciting. It all began from there. Those who wished to live in this country came, and they came in heaps. But we couldn't just make all of those punks our citizens. That's why we had them fight. If they could provide us with entertainment, then it wouldn't hurt to let the just strongest one in. The rest can go straight to their graves for all we care. Having said all that, he then put his face right up to Kino's. Did you get all that, boy? Kino, facial expression unchanged, continued. Yes, I understood it. And I have another question. The soldier, looking unamused, bluntly talked back, what now? Regarding those who participated in the contest, did all of them come knowing beforehand that it was going to be a fight to the death? Have there been any travelers like me who came without knowing the circumstances here? PFFT, gushed out the soldiers upon hearing the question, before completely breaking into hearty laughter. Hey, idiots like you turn up from time to time. We tell them nothing and let them in with a straight face, then all of them would be killed off right in the first round. They'd cry and beg to surrender, like their opponents would actually accept them. There's also this one time when a married couple lost their way and ended up here on a horse carriage, but luckily they were matched together in the first round. The wife surrendered and got off safely, but the husband was killed in the next round. Boy, was that a masterpiece. The second half of his speech was like an invitation to his fellow soldiers to laugh together and reminiscing about that amusing of an incident. All of them were rolling about with laughter. And none of them noticed that Kino's eyes had narrowed down. Hermes had been keeping silent right from the beginning, having been told that the subject was of no relevance to Matorids. This same Hermes also knew that Kino has been showing an unusually fierce emotion of anger. And so the Matorid knew full well what Kino was about to say from this point on. Please lead me to it, then. Called it. Hermes muttered. One among the soldiers, preoccupied with wild laughter, looked at Kino and asked. Did you say something? Met with Kino's expression as the traveler glared at him and his peers, the soldier was taken by surprise by a chill as cold as ice. Like I said, I want you to lead me to it. Kino, still glaring at the soldier, spoke in a detached voice. All soldiers looked at Kino, their laughter cut off. The silence continued for a short while. One among the soldiers then asked in a tone as if taking Kino for an idiot. Whoa there, boy, you're really going to fight? Do you think you can win? Do you even have weapons? Don't tell me you're going to charm your opponents with that cute little face of yours. Ain't that many who fall for your type, you know. As the soldiers heard that, right when they intended to burst into laughter, a thunderous roar resounded. 6 helmets, previously hanged up on the wall, were all blown away. White smoke filled the interior. For a short while, the soldiers were completely clueless as to what had just happened. Then, when the sound of the helmets falling and rolling on the ground finally entered their ears, they finally noticed the hand persuader in Kino's right hand. It was of the 6-chambered revolver type, and Kino called it cannon. How about that? Will it do? While saying that, Kino slowly returned the emptied cannon to its right thigh holster. Don't screw around, you little. Now that the soldiers were finally done processing the situation, the young one, who had been there since the beginning, stepped forward with the intention of grabbing Kino. Right at the next moment, a persuader was thrust at his forehead. The persuader, drew out and held in Kino's left hand, was an automatic type of thin silhouette that utilized .22 LR bullets. To the young soldier whose facial expression and body were frozen in place, and the other soldiers who found themselves in mute amazement, Kino calmly went on to say, I'm participating in the contest. Now this is what I call a mess. After going through the gate, that was the very first thing Hermes said. What entered Kino and Hermes's fields of vision were mountains of garbage. But the place was not a disposal site, the entire city was brimming with trash. The buildings and roads were all filthy, and it was obvious that they had never received any maintenance. Several inhabitants, clothed filthy, were sleeping in the road. The city was quiet, perhaps due to the lack of activities early in the morning. A number of frightfully fat dogs were scrounging for leftovers amid the trash heaps. The whole roadside area stank. Like city, like people, Kino? Or is it the other way around? Hermes said straight out, paying no mind to the soldiers who were guiding them. Kino kept quiet, pushing Hermes along while following the soldiers. Walking down the filthy streets, they arrived at the Colosseum after a short while. It was the same elliptical structure which they had seen from the distance. The tiered platforms of the spectator stands were high, but their edges were cracked in spots, exposing the metal framework within. The upmost tier was crooked particularly badly. It was a structure of horribly cheap construct. I don't know when this place was built or by whom, but this is some awful building. Bad taste in design, too. Once again, Hermes spoke in a manner that expressed unrestrained, honest opinions. Kino was led to the Colosseum's basement and was explained that this place served as the participants' lodgings. The room was the kind that would make one unsure whether to actually call it lodgings or consider it something akin to a prison, however. Inside it was a bed so worn out that its springs poked out, a small window above it, and a washstand and a flush toilet, befitting of a country with an abundance of water supply. The place was dark, cool, and in just the right level of humidity. I don't even know where to start with this country, Hermes said to Kino right after the guiding soldiers left them. Kino's coat was removed and rolled up. The traveler was wearing a black jacket underneath it, with a thick belt wrapped around the waist. Several pouches were attached to the belt, and to its right side, on the thigh, hung the holster of the Persuader cannon. To the back side of the waist was the holster of another Persuader, the one Kino called Woodsman, its grip pointed upwards. It wasn't like this in its olden days. It seemed to have been a wonderful country that any traveler would want to visit. Seated on the bed, Kino spoke in an uninterested tone while pulling out the Woodsman. Its magazine was dropped off. Its safety was unlocked, its slide shifted, and the bullet inside the chamber was then picked out. And because of that, you were so happy to get to come check it out, only to find that it's now like this. Looks like the man who became the current king really is extremely different from the last, huh? Probably, yeah. Kino unloaded the luggage off Hermes, took out 5 empty magazines for the Woodsman, and began loading each of them up. Are you seriously going to do it, Kino? Do what? Kino took out cannon, shifted its central wedge, then pulled the whole front half off the grip, barrel and all. The contest, I mean. I know you're offended and all, Kino, but that's no reason for you to play along with this crazy country. Just give your opponent a good shake in the first round, and when they're about to surrender, you do it yourself instead. Then we can kiss this place goodbye. Oh, yeah, I could do that. Kino slipped cannon cylinder off, then produced 2 empty cylinders from one of the pouches. While loading one of the cylinders into cannon, Kino said. But let's leave that as last resort. I knew it. So you're seriously going to participate? Yeah, for the time being, I plan to go as far as I can. Besides, if everything is going to end in 3 days, it wouldn't hurt to see it through. Using something that looked like a syringe, Kino proceeded to pour green liquid propellant into a cylinder's 6 empty chambers, then put in the felt paddings and bullets. Cannon's front half was then fitted back in place. The loading lever under the barrel was folded down, and with the plunger operating simultaneously, the lever mechanism pushed in the bullet in the cylinder's bottommost chamber. Kino took care not to pack each of them in too tightly. The process was then repeated for the 2 other cylinders. After all bullets were fitted in, their tops were coated with plenty of grease. This was done so as to prevent the spreading of sparks from one chamber to the next while firing. Then, the cylinder's backsides, where the hammer would strike, were covered with small caps. They were called percussion caps. When struck, the resulting sparks would serve to ignite the liquid propellant. They need not be fitted in one at a time by hand, they were placed through a dedicated loader with pre-fitted percussion caps. The loader's pointed end were to be applied to the cylinder's backside. To Kino, who showed such an earnest expression while preparing those persuaders, Hermes spoke up. Good grief. There's no stopping you once you make up your mind, ha. Kino fiddled around to double-check Cannon's functionality, then, as if recalling something, suddenly smiled and said. It's important that you use your abilities to the fullest once in a while. Otherwise your skill will grow dull before you even know it. Hearing that, Hermes then said in a monotone recitation. Oh, is that so? So that's His Majesty the King. Kino, still clothed in the same jacket, walked toward the center of the Colosseum, while looking at the person sitting right in the middle of the spectator seatings. In the box seat, seemingly reserved for nobility, was a middle-aged man in gaudy clothing with a crown on his head. The crown was of a simple design, which in itself gave the accessory a dignified appearance. It was a truly horrible match with the current king's showy attire. On either side of the king were young women clad in equally flashy clothes. The royal box was encompassed in glass, brightly reflected sunlight. And these must be the glorious citizens. Kino slowly gazed around. The seats were filled to the brim with spectators excited to see murder before their eyes, regardless of their sex and age. Annoyingly loud sounds of cheer filled the air. Just moments before, Kino had gotten out of the basement room, answering the call of the designated participants' numbers. I won't find it interesting anyway, so I'll pass. Try to keep it down so that they don't die, yeah? Hermie said, choosing instead to rest in the comfort of the room. The Colosseum Center was an elliptic field, scattered about with junk such as wrecked vehicles and demolished buildings. In the center of the mall was a circular open space of about 20 meters in diameter. Just that place was left completely clear. The round would begin when both participants stood at opposite edges of the circle. While on the way there, Kino painstakingly surveyed the area. From the opposite side appeared a gigantic man, looking more like a massive muscle with a head attached. His torso was bare, and his shaved head shone bright in the light. He held a thick chain, at the end of which was a gigantic iron ball the size of a child. Upon reaching his position, the giant tugged at the chains, finally bringing the iron ball to where he was. He then looked at Kino and spoke up in a voice at least as loud as the cheering. Hey, what's this? This little brat is my first opponent? I am, yes. Before the round, I have 2 questions I'd like to ask you. First, for what purpose did you come to this country? To Kino's question, the giant responded with a questioning expression, what? I asked, for what purpose did you come to this country? What are you, stupid? I've come here to kill all of you and become a citizen, of course. The giant said in an exasperated tone. Kino nodded in acknowledgement, then said, second question. Won't you surrender? Come again? If you surrender now, you'll be able to get out of here unharmed. The giant, taken aback, did not provide an answer. Seizing his chain and pulling the iron ball toward himself, he then began to swing it. Slowly at first, then gradually faster. The iron ball whizzed through the air above the giant's head. Kino shrugged, right hand tapping lightly on cannon. Before long, the audience quietened down. P-U-U-U-N. A resonance of trumpets, however lacking in energy, signaled commencement of the round. D. Almost simultaneously with the giant's shout, every muscle in his body bulked up. The iron ball swung forth, aimed right at Kino, but never hit its mark. It instead flew in a completely different direction, drawing a clean parabolic arc in the sky, then squashing a burnt-out car which served as its landing spot. The giant, clueless as to what had just happened, looked at what remained of the chain in his hands for a short while. Hauling the end of it toward himself, he then observed that it had been beautifully severed. Yuham. He muttered while looking at Kino. In Kino's right hand was cannon, still smoking. For some reason or another, the giant, his expression signifying that the situation had finally sunk in, pointed at the end of the chain and asked Kino. You shot it? And Kino answered. I shot it, yes. Then, the giant pointed into the distance, at the spot where the iron ball had landed. And it flew over there? It totally flew over there, yes. Could you please surrender? Asked as such by Kino, the giant immediately answered. Apologies. I'll go with that. My. Uhu. So I'm up against a little brat. Yuhi-hayu. Amid the twilight, Kino was faced with a second opponent, who said more or less the same greeting as the giant from the first round, disregarding the addition of creepy laughing. This time, the participant was a young man of thin physique and tall stature, whose purple hair stood up like coxcomb. He held no weapons in his hands. His body, both upper and lower, was clothed in tight black garment. A large number of metal blades were stuck to his abdomen. Each of the thin metal blades possessed about the same length as his palms. They were bent, albeit only slightly, in the middle. Clinging tightly to his body, it seemed as if they were his scales, or perhaps a strip of armor. Kino stared at those metal blades for a moment, prioritizing them over the opponent himself. The man thereupon picked off one of those bits and threw it away to his side. The metal bit spun through the air, then made an abrupt turn, starting back to where it came. The man reached for his back with his left arm, then stretched it straight out from his body. From his wrist to his left ankle, a swath of cloth spread forth, as if it was a wing of a manga. He then crossed his legs, taking one elegant step to the right. The returning metal bit hit the cloth and stuck, as if being sucked right in. The man tapped on his right shoulder with his left hand, then tapped the cloth over his abdomen with his right. When he spread out his arms once again, the metal bit could be seen, fitted back right where it once was. Yuhi-hayu. Did you see that? These handmade throwing blades of mine all returned to their original place. Kino put up a light scowl, then abruptly spoke up. Please surrender. I'll accept it. Now, that's not going to happen. How about you surrender? Well, not that I'll accept it until you're dead though. Yuhi-hi-hi-hayu. The man laughed while giving his answer. He pressed both his hands against his abdomen in a grasping gesture. He then bent slightly forward, raising only his head up to glare at Kino. Kino's right hand tapped on cannon. P-U-U-U-N. Trumpets resounded. Right that moment, the man plucked off a metal blade with his right hand and flicked it at Kino. His hand then returned to his abdomen, grabbing and throwing more blades in succession. He did so such speed that made it impossible for one to track his hands by eye. Kino ran to the right, dodging the blades. To the side, the metal blade spun, narrowly flying past with ferocious speed. The man kept on throwing, this time aiming at Kino's right. The man refrained from throwing all that he had, leaving about half of them clinging to his abdomen. He shook his hips back and forth, shouting taunts with an ominous voice. You're right, when what I just threw turned back, I'll be throwing the rest. Let's see if you can dodge them coming from both sides. Kino took a quick glance to the rear, observing that the metal blades were turning in mid-air. Die. Simultaneously with his scream, the man repeatedly threw all but one of what he had left. The metal blades flew straight for Kino. Kino lightly shook head, then dropped face down, flat on the ground. Nuha! The man exclaimed in a strange voice. If they're sure to return to you, then they're also sure to never hit the ground, aren't they? Kino said to no one in particular. Hi. And at the same time, the metal blades whistled past over Kino's head. Then, right when the returning metal blades were caught by the man's cloth, Kino, still down on the ground, fired cannon. Simultaneously with a thunderous roar and puff of white smoke, Kino's right arm sprung up. The bullet struck the last remaining metal blade on the man, right on top of the pit of his stomach. The impact shocked the man to his core. Gahayo! That was all the man could utter as his eyes opened wide and his mouth gaped. He was immobilized for an instant. Then he staggered, half of his consciousness still hanging on. Kino, observing as he swayed around like a metronome, shot him in the side of his right thigh. The moment he was hit, the man shuddered and fell over, bleeding from his leg. The metal blades passed over him. Kino returned to the room and lit a candle, as it had already turned gloomy by that time. The traveler then put Cannon and the woodsman on the bed and took off the jacket. Cannon was then disassembled and fitted with a new cylinder. Aha! Oh, it's just Kino. When did you get back? Hermes, who had been sound asleep, asked in a voice that was still not quite awake. While assembling Cannon, Kino said. Just now. We're staying here tonight, by the way. Eh, figures. Well, more sleep it is, then. And so Hermes fell into slumber once more. The next day, Kino woke at the break of dawn. The room had turned gloomy once more, but the sun rose soon enough, giving just enough illumination to the vicinity. Kino cleaned Cannon's cylinder that had been fired the day before, and loaded it with new bullets. Eating portable rations for breakfast, Kino then did some light exercises to limber up the muscles. Shortly afterward, it was training with the woodsman, and after that, with Cannon. A little while later, the soldier finally came to call the participants. Hermes was sleeping all the while. Kino's first opponent for day 2 looked at the traveler without uttering a word. He was an elderly man of sturdy physique and short stature. His light brown hair and beard were so long and full that one would not be able to tell where their ends were, and his face was covered in wrinkles. He wore a baggy and slightly filthy robe. He seemed to be carrying something on his back, since there was an odd bulge right there beneath the robe. For some reason, he was carrying a gilded trombone under his arms, holding it with great care. There was nothing else in his hands. A homeless man who carried all of his household goods on his back, performing in back alleys for a living. That was the impression he gave off. Kino looked at him for a while, then called out loudly. If you would like to surrender, I have all the intention to accept it, sir. The man gave no reply. Keeping silent, he lightly waved his right hand. Kino's right hand tapped on Cannon's grip. P-U-U-U-N. Simultaneously with the sound of trumpets, the man poised his trombone with terrific vigor, pointing its bell at Kino. Kino, too, drew out Cannon right when the trumpet sounded, firing a shot. The bullet struck the trombone's bell, knocking it away to the right. Right then, from the hole where the sounds of music would normally emerge, a lukewarm gelatinous liquid of purple coloration spewed out instead. It burst into flames almost instantly as it flew through the air in a parabola, completing in an arch of fire. The arch then faded away, as if the fire was jumping off the trombone's bell, landing on the ground in a fiery puddle. I knew it was special. A flamethrower, ha! Kino said, left hand reaching for the backside of the waist belt, drawing out the woodsman. Its safety was turned off, and its aim was locked on to the man's head. Kino fired a shot, intentionally missing the mark by a small margin. The persuader rang a dry plosive sound. Its slide shifted backward, then back forward at an intense speed, the empty cartridge was flicked out, and a new one was loaded in its place. The moment the bullet whizzed past the man's face, he once again pointed his trombone at his opponent at Kino. With a stern look in his eyes, however surrounded by wrinkles, the man poised for action, exerting strength onto his whole body. Poo-poo-poo pssh, a miserable sound reverberated right then as a geyser of purple gushed up from the man's right shoulder. Dyed in purple by the liquid that had rained down, the man was overcome with surprise. Kino, with the woodsman in left hand and cannon in the right, addressed him. I shot the hidden hose on your shoulder. The hole may be small, but any more pressure and it will explode. You will surrender now, won't you, sir? The man closely observed the state of his own body. He continued doing so for a short while, before speaking up in a deep voice. I refuse. You no longer have a way to win this. Kino said to the man while aiming at him with the woodsman. The man glared back at his opponent without so much as a quiver. Kill me. Pardon? I said kill me. When Kino was about to say something, a voice from the spectator seat yelled. Finish him. Kill him. The others in the audience then started to shout, one after another. Kill. 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 Kill him. Kill. 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 Kill him now. Kill. 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 Shoot him. Kill. Kill. Kino slowly turned, looking at the audience as they screamed gleefully, as if they have turned mad. Then, all of a sudden, a shot from cannon was fired up into the air. Simultaneously with the explosive roar, the entirety of the spectator seatings instantly fell silent. Kino then took a look at the royal box seat, in which the king was seated. As usual, the king was clothed in gaudy attire, sitting high up and looking down at Kino, with a sneer painted on his face. As their eyes met, Kino returned a glare hidden under a well-mannered smile. The elderly man interrupted. What are you doing? Hurry and shoot me. In a fight to the death, the winner lives, and the loser dies. That has always been the way of my life. I've killed hundreds. And I've lost this contest. That is why I will die, and you, Lil Miss, will live on. Kino produced a wry smile, saying, Now, sir, Lil Miss is a tad bit awkward, so I'll have to ask you to drop it. I'm Kino. Kino, a good name. I'll remember to take that with me to the afterlife. Why, thank you. While saying so, Kino strode up to the man, stopped just in front of him, pointed cannon against his forehead, then cocked the hammer with the thumb. Clink. Please surrender. No. So I'm left with no choice, then. Kino pulled the trigger. The hammer was slowly lowered back in place with a press of the thumb. The man looked up at Kino in a dubious expression, and Kino grinned back at him. The next moment, Kino abruptly spun cannon around, clutching it on the long barrel instead. With the movement of a backhand slap, the persuader, gripped face to its wielder's right, walloped the man on his temple. That made short work of the situation almost instantaneous. The man, unable to utter a word, toppled over to his right, unconscious. The cutie like you as my opponent? What in the world were your other opponents even doing? The second opponent for day 2 the semi-final round, in other words, confronted Kino and spoke bluntly. A young woman with long, blonde hair pulled back and tied together, she was a beauty of sharp facial features and tall stature. She wore a camp shirt and cargo pants, giving off the impression of a military outfit. Over her shirt was a vest covered in little pouches. Pouches were also attached to the thighs of her pants, these ones of the deep type, seemingly for storing bundles of long, narrow objects. Gripped in her left hand was a persuader, a rifle type with wooden stock. It was a bolt-action model, meaning after each shot, the ejecting of spent cartridges and the loading of new bullets had to be done manually. The magazine could be seen protruding out slightly in front of the gunlock. Other than that part, the persuader was of a slim silhouette, making it look more like a pole. They must have been careless. Ah ha ha, they probably did. I use that trick all the time, too. Kino asked. Is becoming a citizen your goal? Me? It is, yeah. Do you know why? As Kino denied knowing so, the woman suddenly declared in a tone of wild enthusiasm. A while ago, when I was in the area, I found this super cute boy at the edge of the forest. I'm going to make him mine, no matter what. Kino was taken aback. and it showed conspicuously on the face. It's the thing they call womanly nature, I suppose. Do you understand, don't you? No. Oh, that's so? Still in an expression of mixed feelings, Kino asked. I'm pretty sure you'll refuse, but could you please surrender? Hey, that's my line. The reply came without so much as a moment's delay. So it's futile, as I thought. Kino muttered, right hand tapping on cannon. The woman pulled her persuader's bolt open. Then, from a pouch on her chest, she produced a stripper clip of 5 long ammunition cartridges. She inserted them into the chamber, all in one go. Then she removed the clip, closed the bolt, and loaded the first shot. Puun. Right as the trumpet sounded, both participants broke away from each other, dashing for the junk heaps behind them. They then dove for cover behind those heaps. The woman quickly found refuge behind a heap of scrapped iron components, assumed a half-crouching stance, then pointed her long persuader forward, holding it firmly. She then breathed in quickly, exhaled only a little bit of it, then held her breath. Aiming at the core of the junk heap which Kino had hidden behind, she fired a shot. Together with a long, sharp plosive sound, the woman bent backwards in recoil. From the first junk heap, Kino jumped behind another heap to the side. The bullet pierced through the heap which Kino had hidden behind previously, tearing its way to the spot where Kino had been just seconds ago. The woman could see Kino leaping away from the heap which she had shot at. You're pretty good. Clink. The woman operated the rifle bolt with intense speed, ejecting the spent cartridge and loading the next. Armor-piercing bullets, ha. Kino muttered, left hand drawing out the woodsman and flicking off the safety. Cautiously, but also swiftly, Kino circled around to the woman's right side, heading for another cover. Slowly peeking out from below a slab of iron plating, Kino caught a glint of the woman's golden hair. Kino then dove to the neighboring rubble, a strip of stone wall. Right when the traveler lied face down Bako. The sound of a bullet could be heard as it drilled right through the stone. Bako. 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 The woman fired 3 more shots in succession, with all the intention to get rid of Kino, an obstacle to her goal. With each hit, the collective mass of stone wavered. Staying down, Kino then caught sight of a fist-sized rocks rolling on the ground in close proximity. The woman, still holding her persuader firmly, picked out a new ammunition clip and loaded it in. When she took aim and prepared to continue firing, she felt an acute pain run through her head. Ouch! As the woman looked up, she could see a rock flying at her, right before her eyes. She dodged in a panic, but it still managed to struck her shoulder. More rocks followed, falling in rapid succession. The woman did not stay put, rushing to the mountain of scrap metal diagonally in front of her and crouching down. As she placed her left hand on her head, blood ran down from under her golden hair. Damn! The woman, in a brief fit of anger, carelessly poked her head out of cover and pointed her persuader, only to withdraw right back down in a hurry, as she saw that Kino was aiming right at her. Kino did not shoot, instead running while still keeping steady aim on the woman, then hiding behind a heap of furniture and building wreckage chairs, desks, window frames, and doors. Sweat and a single line of blood ran down the woman's forehead, and she wiped them off with her hand. Kino shouted a question to the woman. Can you hear me? Are you sure you won't surrender? Very funny. Don't you dare underestimate women. In this short range, that persuader puts you at a disadvantage. That was the woman's reply. Crouching with back against a metal door in the junk heap, Kino sighed, left hand's grip on the woodsman tightening. Sweat appeared on Kino's forehead, too, with one drop trickling down the cheek. Kino muttered. Winning without killing really is hard, master. Meanwhile, the woman pulled out her persuader's bolt, as per the disassembly procedure. From a pocket on the backside of her waist, she took out a cylindrical component and inserted it into where the bolt once was. It fitted into the chamber perfectly, as if it had always been there before. Then, from the pouch on one of her thighs, the woman took out a long, narrow magazine. Then, she grinned. Kino peeped through the lower left corner of the junk heap and checked what was happening ahead. Looking at the mountain of scrap metal which the woman has been hiding behind, Kino shot the topmost lump of metal with the woodsman. Gone. The scrap rang with a satisfying sound and fell to the other side, bringing other pieces on the heap crumbling down along with it. The woman held her persuader under her arms and leapt out, and while holding it in that manner, fired a shot. Kino had intended to jump out of cover immediately when the woman fired a shot, but stopped the decision in a hurry, taken by surprise, upon hearing the comparatively short roar of the shot and the comparatively light impact of the bullet. For about 3 seconds, an uninterrupted stream of bullets streaked forth. They landed and kicked up the dirt right beside Kino, who now laid low on the ground. What the? Kino rolled to the right edge of the junk heap and slowly peeked out. The woman could be seen under a new cover, 2 heaps apart from where Kino was. her persuader had a new component sticking out of it. A long, narrow magazine, slanted to the right. Now that's a first. Kino blurted out while withdrawing back into cover. The persuader, which had been fired and loaded manually up until moments ago, had suddenly turned into an automatic type, capable of firing tens of uninterrupted shots. The strategy would be to wait for her to fire all she had, then approach her while shooting continuously, forcing her to surrender without giving her enough time to reload, but that's unreliable. Kino muttered. At the same time, a storm of bullets assaulted the right side of the junk heap. As chips of scrap metal danced and fluttered about, Kino retreated to the middle of the heap. The woman pulled her magazine, which still had a few shots left, and loaded in a new one. She revealed herself from cover in an imposing stance, held her persuader in a half-crouching posture, and slowly approached the rubble which Kino was hiding behind. Then, she said, "You've done well, persisting this long. Big Sis here is going to wrap things up for you. I won't shoot anymore, so come on out. I'll accept your surrender." "Oh, really?" Kino's reply came from the opposite side of the junk heap. Training her aim on the right side of the heap, while also keeping a cautious glare on the left, the woman walked slowly to her right. Mere seconds later, the woman suddenly opened fire and circled around to the back of the heap, charging in head-on. Bullets, spent shells, and plosive sounds scattered and filled the air. Kino was nowhere to be seen behind the rubble which she had sprayed bullets at. Instead, a door was there, stood up slantwise. Several bullets had struck the door, and all of them bounced off. Within a split second, the woman came to the conclusion that Kino had circled around to the other side. She held her fire, and as she was about to turn around, she noticed that a person's hand was sticking out one side of the door, gripping a hand persuader. And on the other side, half of a person's face was peeking out diagonally, one of those large eyes looking right at her. "Liiiaarrr," Kino said, seemingly enjoying it. The woman was painted in an expression of astonishment. Together with dry string of plosive sounds, the woodsman fired off 3 bullets, all piercing the woman's right shoulder. The woman's persuader dropped from her hands. Keeping steady aim on the woman, Kino emerged from behind the door. "HMPH," the woman briefly sneered. Then, she shook her head, saying, "Looks like I have no choice, so I surrender. Thank you very much." As Kino said that, the woman, blood dripping from her head and shoulder, asked with a smile, "Hey, you're even cuter up close. Want to do something nice with me later?" When Kino returned to the room, Hermes, sleeping as usual, woke up to the rustling sound. Kino was carrying a heavy-looking paper bag. "Welcome back, Kino. Good to see you safe. What's that, by the way? You lost and got a participation award or something?" While carefully lowering the paper bag onto the bed, Kino said, "Nope. These are the things I need for tomorrow." "Oh dear." From the paper bag, Kino took out a bottle of green fluid. It was the same liquid propellant that cannon used for firing. Then, a small cardboard box was taken out. It contained .44 caliber bullets. They had hollow pointed tips, gouged in quite like a volcano's caldera. From the luggage, Kino produced a small portable stove, put in several chunks of solid fuel, and lit a fire. Then, after washing a cup usually used and for drinking tea, Kino poured some liquid propellant into it, put it over the flame. "What are you doing there, Kino?" Kino, carefully handling the process, answered Hermes without turning around. "Concentrating the propellant." "Playing with fire? That's dangerous." "What for?" When the cup's contents started to thicken, Kino removed it from the fire, poured in even more liquid propellant, then put it back over the flame. Doing this makes the propellant more dense, increasing the power of its explosion. The bullet's initial velocity, too. As Kino gently stirred the contents of the cup, the liquid propellant started to boil down until it was dense as starch syrup. The washstand was then filled with water, and the cup's bottom was put in it to cool down. The propellant's viscosity and dullness of color further increased, turning into an almost solid dark green paint. Then, Kino reached for a bullet. One of hollow point type, which prioritized destructive power over pure penetration. For that purpose, the bullet would burst apart and expand as it hit its target. Because it had a hole in the middle, its rims were thin. Kino took only one bullet, carefully filling up the hole at its tip with concentrated liquid propellant. Leaving some space at the top, Kino then closed the hole with regular liquid propellant and topped it with a percussion cap. Next, Kino took out some epoxy putty. It was normally used for mending damage to Hermes's parts, such as screw heads and bolt holes, and it would possess a fair level of solidity when dried and hardened. Kino mixed putties A and B together, taking care to keep them in proper proportions. Then, the mixture was gently applied to the tip of the bullet, over the percussion cap which had just been placed on. The tip of the bullet, formerly a caldera, was now beautifully molded into a cone, turning it into a stratovolcano. Kino then incised a deep cross into it with a knife. Soon after, the putty dried. Done. Kino raised up the handmade bullet, happy as a child. By this time, Hermes was already sound asleep. On the morning of the third day in this country, Kino woke at the break of dawn. First things first, the woodsman was dismantled, cleaned, and reloaded, then it was practice, as always. After having only an adequate amount of breakfast, Kino spoke to the soldier assigned to the room, asking for materials containing information on the country's history and laws. Here, Igo. Brought a book by the soldier. Kino read it in all its minute details. Regarding 7 years prior, the previous king, loved dearly for his strict policies, had been assassinated by his son, or in other words, the current king, with a particularly brutal method. It seemed that the current king had loathed for a long time his father and the strictness of his ways. On a particular occasion, the frustration he had bottled up for many years finally erupted. He eliminated all who opposed his actions. It was a massacre which had taken most of those who had the former king's blood. Brothers and sisters, uncle and aunts, the whole household, all slaughtered. He had not killed his own wife, but she was overcome with grief and committed suicide. Both his children were exiled, their whereabouts unknown. A theory has it that they had been killed, and a rumor has it that they were imprisoned underground to this day. He then crowned himself king, beginning to lead a life of debauchery and imposing arbitrary laws onto this naturally bountiful and blessed country. He encouraged the citizens, who had lived diligent and simple lives up until then, to change their ways. There seemed to have been some resistance among the masses. They adjusted quickly to the pleasure-seeking lifestyle, however, and before long, most of the people had come to love their present king dearly. What half-hearted creatures. And now, back to the present. By the time Hermes woke up, which was almost noon, Kino was summoned to the final round. Kino fitted cannon with an empty cylinder and loaded one of the chambers with concentrated liquid propellant, cramming in twice the usual amount. Then, without putting in felt padding, Kino loaded in the handmade bullet, the one which had been made last night. Using an empty .44 caliber cartridge, Kino pushed the rim of the bullet, fitting it into the cylinder. Then, to the chamber opposite to the one that was loaded, only several sheets of padding were applied, pushed in with the plunger. A single percussion cap was fixed to the chamber containing the bullet. What do you think you're doing, Kino? With how you set it up, you can only fire once. Kino smiled, saying, "It's fine this way," then rotated the one-shot cylinder and put cannon into its holster. Next, Kino loaded all of the luggage onto Hermes, secured them firmly, then hung the coat on top. "All right, let's go. I'd like you to watch this round closely, Hermes." Hermes, now down from the stand, was pushed along as Kino left the room. "Why?" "So that we can leave this no-shower country right when it's all over," Kino said, seemingly delighted. Amid the roar of applause, Kino strode to the center of the Colosseum. Behind the traveler, Hermes, used as a coat hanger, could be seen left standing at the field's entranceway. Above the motorway was the tiered platforms of the spectator seats. At its center, right in front, the king could be seen sipping alcohol while seated in an arrogant manner. When Kino had reached the center, the final opponent emerged from the opposite side. Kino carefully observed the man as he walked toward the clearing. The man was a young one, likely in his early 20s. He was of tall stature, his build well proportioned. His hair was of the same black as Kino's. He wore blue jeans and a green sweater with cloth padding on the shoulders and elbows. Kino's eyes met with the man's. His expression was completely different from that of the previous opponents. Although he was about to take part in a battle, he was somehow perfectly calm, his smile giving off an air of kindness, as if he was a martyr making his way up the gallows. His only weapon was the katana on his waist, its scabbard tucked in his belt. "Excuse me, mister," Hermes called out to the middle-aged soldier who also standing there at the entranceway. "What? That friendly-looking katana guy is the final opponent?" "Yeah, that's right. He'd flawlessly won all his fights up till now. Anyone can see that he's one tough customer. Your partner is pretty good too, but things might get dangerous this time." Hermes, not particularly surprised, said, "Mem. That's it? Just of mem? You're not even worried about your partner or what?" The soldier posed the question reflexively. "Worry? Worrying won't make Kino any stronger. You're a cold one, you know that? Now, it'll probably be fine. But putting the match aside, it looks like Kino is cooking up some unpleasant scheme. I'm more worried about that, I guess." "What?" At the time, the soldier was clueless as to what Hermes was saying. "I am called Shizu." The man with the katana confronted Kino and declared his name. His tone was polite, with beautiful pronunciation to boot. I'm Kino. Kino replied. Kino, I see. I have a request to make, if you don't mind. What might that be? Shizu said the same words Kino had said 4 times before. I'd like you to surrender, right here, right now. I will accept, of course. Kino, mildly surprised, asked. You want to become a citizen, Shizu? Yes. I want to be. Of this cesspool of a country? This time it was Shizu who was taken by surprise. He stood there staring at Kino for a short while. Although he had a piercing look in his eyes, it was not to the degree of being a glare. Now this is surprising. You know that, yet you still participated this fiasco of a contest? Not to mention winning all the way to the final round. It's not for the sake of becoming a citizen, is it? Yes, it's not. But what about you? What's your story? Shizu averted his gaze, thought about some things for a moment, then looked back at Kino in the eyes. He then calmly spoke up. There is something I absolutely have to do, and for that, I have to become a citizen. Again, I'd like you to surrender. I don't really get where you're coming from, but I refuse. Kino said, decisively. Why? You don't even want to become a citizen, so why do you fight? Shizu asked, his expression suggesting that he couldn't comprehend the response he received. It's nothing complicated. I want to fight, right here, right now. That is why. Kino said, lightly tapping cannon in its right thigh holster. As if giving up, Shizu shook his head, then looked back for a moment at the entranceway where he came out of. With the thumb of his left hand, he soundlessly extracted his katana from its scabbard. With his right hand, he gripped the hilt, then unsheathed. The silver blade revealed its form. Shizu gripped its hilt with both hands. Puun. Trumpets resounded. Kino slowly drew out the woodsman, unlocked the safety, then locked the aim on Shizu. But the shot was not fired. Shizu held his ground. He held up his katana at middle stance, the blade only slightly angled. The air of gentleness he'd seemed to possess mere moments before had vanished. Tension filled the air around him, as if his body and his katana had been melded into a single weapon. Shizu took one step toward Kino. Then another. Kino fired one shot with the woodsman. The bullet passed well to the side of Shizu's head. Without so much as a flinch, Shizu let it pass, then took another step. Kino fired again, this time aiming just barely to the side of Shizu's head. Still unfazed, Shizu let the bullet get a close shave on his ear, then took another step. Kino let out a brief sigh, then aimed at Shizu's right shoulder. Shizu immediately held up his blade, aligning it with Kino's line of aim. Kino, taken by surprise, pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the blade and was thrown off course, slanting to the back. Whoa. As if it was someone else's problem, Kino was up front and showing admiration for Shizu, all the while firing off several more shots, meant for the man's hands and legs. Shizu handled his blade swiftly and smoothly, knocking each of the bullets away to his sides. Then, he took another step. Is he that, Matorit? That's how awesome he is. The middle-aged soldier said to Hermes, seemingly rooting for the man. Huh. Swiping bullets with a katana is pretty awesome, yeah. Is he able to tell when Kino's about to shoot or something? He's probably looking at his opponent's aim and the movement of their eyes and fingers. Also beat Persuader users like that in the last 2 rounds. Cool. I've always questioned whether or not this world is beautiful, but it's a vast one, that's for sure. Hermes expressed frankly the fact of being surprised. The soldier assumed a know-it-all persona, saying, you could say that he's the kind of guy who doesn't respond to persuasions. You a poet or what, mister? Heh, the middle-aged soldier let out an awkward chuckle back at Hermes' snark, then continued. But really, I wonder why he hasn't killed anybody. Come again? He hasn't killed anybody. Handed out cuts and brush sizes like candy, though. Like your partner, now that I mention it. Fired shots, but never killed. It's unheard of, having both participants come all the way to the last round without killing anybody. What are they even thinking? The soldier spoke in a tone indistinguishable between admiration and disgust. What are they even thinking, indeed? As Hermes muttered so, several roars of Persuader shot echoed. Kino had now fired 8 shots without hitting Shizu once. The woodsman's magazine, with 2 bullets remaining in it, was dropped off, and a new one with 10 was loaded in. Shizu was now standing right before Kino. Could you please surrender? Shizu said calmly, while holding up his katana at middle stance. I would rather not. Kino answered, aim locked onto Shizu's blade. This wasn't done deliberately, but rather because the blade followed wherever Kino's aim went. Kino fired a shot. The bullet was deflected. Right then, Shizu rushed forward, closing the gap between them in an instant. Ha! Wielding the katana in only his right hand, Shizu sliced diagonally upward from his bottom left with tremendous speed. The top of the blade struck the woodsman's barrel, flinging it from Kino's left hand. With his left hand, Shizu immediately reached up for the katana's hilt, then soundlessly reversed the blade. Now gripping the hilt with both hands, he swept downward, aiming for Kino's left shoulder. Right when the woodsman was knocked away, Kino poised for defense, slightly bending down the left knee, made a cross guard with both arms overhead, then took one step toward Shizu. Clank! Kino held the cross guard up high, catching the blunt-edged overhead slash at the spot the blade met its hilt. Sparks scattered upon impact. What the? Just as Shizu blurted out a short reaction, Kino shoved his blade aside with a swing of the left arm, then spun around to his right flank. Riding on the momentum, Kino slammed Shizu's temple with the heel of the right palm. While staggering to his right side from the impact of the hook, Shizu used his right hand to swing his katana at Kino's side. There was not much force put into the attack, enabling Kino to cast it aside with a swing of the left arm. A metallic chime rang upon impact. Shizu took 2 steps back, promptly regained his bearings, then held up his katana once again at middle stance. Kino poised for defense, assuming a defensive stance with right foot stepping back and arms guarding both sides. Kino then briefly loosened up, shaking both arms lightly as if they'd gone to sleep. The metallic surface could be seen peeking from beneath the cuts on the jacket. Something had been put under its sleeves. You're good. I can see that you are well versed in the art of persuasion. That's a surprise. Shizu reversed his katana, turning its sharp edge in Kino's direction. But I would really prefer that you surrender soon. Shizu said without even a slight movement, holding his katana firmly. Kino stood still and lowered both arms naturally, then replied, I refuse. When I become a citizen, I could make a law that makes you a citizen, too. I would rather you not do that. I have no interest in becoming a citizen, after all. Ah, right. But if we keep going, you'll die. While his eyes were glaring at Kino, Shizu spoke to the traveler with a gentle tone. In opposition, Kino spoke in jest. Truth be told, in this country, I haven't killed anyone up till now. Shizu pulled a wry face. Huh. So what? So you see. Kino produced a smile, then continued in a tone of amusement. I figured I'd kill at least one person to end it all with a bang. Shizu did not answer. Instead, he stared at Kino, with a look in his eyes seeming to show sympathy. Kino looked back at Shizu, with a look in those eyes suggesting enjoyment and liveliness, as if finally coming across a long-awaited individual among a bustling crowd. Shizu suddenly moved forward. Closing the distance between them in an instant, he brandished his weapon overhead. Kino smiled, albeit faintly, right hand reaching for cannon and drawing it out. In an instant, both sides froze all movement. Kino had pointed cannon at Shizu just before he could bring down his katana. Seeing that the persuader's hammer had already been raised, Shizu knew full well that a light pull on the trigger would blow a large hole in his chin. The man whispered, You're quick. I just have to calm down and look closely to know where a slash is coming from. Way easier than you telling where a persuader is being aimed at. After that, I only have to be quicker on the draw. You're too obsessed with winning. It might be imprudent of me to say this, but contests exist for the purpose of having fun. Not for the purpose of killing. While fixated on Shizu's expression, Kino said, as if admonishing him. The masking front of strength faded from Shizu's face, returning to the calmness which Kino had seen in the beginning. Shizu, keeping his upper stance, spoke up. It's over. I've lost. So what now? Will you accept my surrender? Or am I to die here? Neither of those. Receiving an immediate reply, Shizu noticed that Kino's expression had changed abruptly. Kino's lips was still locked in a smile, but that gaze was surely not laughing together with it. Kino's left hand reached under cannon's barrel and pulled down the loading lever, folding the mechanism just like when loading a bullet. Felt paddings had been crammed into the chamber's bottommost chamber. As if to squash them, Kino folded the mechanism hard. At the same time, Kino's right hand pushed cannon from the back. As if being clamped tight, the persuader was held perfectly still between both of Kino's hands. What are you doing? Just as Shizu asked that, a shout came echoing from the spectator seatings, That's enough. Kill him. And before long, more followed, weaving into a chorus. Kill. 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 Expression unchanged, Kino approached Shizu while still keeping aim on him, then edged slightly to the left. What are you waiting for? If you're going to kill me, then. Kino shifted the aim to Shizu's throat, whole body bracing for impact. As their eyes met, Kino asked a question, as if throwing out a child's riddle. Who's there behind you? What? You. No way. Kino shouted. Get down. Shizu folded down on his knees, and Kino pulled cannon's trigger. The hammer struck the percussion cap. The liquid propellant, with explosive power raised as much as it could have been, ignited, sending the bullet off to squeeze its way forward. The bullet leapt from the barrel, diving through the hoop between Shizu's arms. The discharge created a white shockwave, blasting right at Shizu's face. The impact knocked him backward in a somersault. Kino was thrown backward as well, both shoulders aching from the recoil. The bullet headed straight for the royal box seat in the center of the tiered platforms, just as Kino had intended it to. Spearheaded with putty, the bullet hit the glass, which was not all that thick, and pierced right through. The glass shattered to pieces, its countless fragments tumbling down like a waterfall. The force of impact broke the bullet's pointed tip apart into 4 pieces, just according to how it was incised. The remainder of the bullet continued toward the man seated in the middle seat, the one who wore the crown, entering his mouth and striking his upper jaw. It pierced his skin, pulverized his bones, tore through his flesh, and entered his head. The bullet's rim crunched, as if turned inside out. The shot then reached the percussion cap. A small spark flew, igniting the concentrated liquid propellant. The king's head exploded. His face spread forth, scattering into countless bits of flesh. From both sides of his temporal region, a mixture of his shredded skull, ear flesh, and brain tissue gushed out. The scalp of the back of his head ruptured, hair and all, blowing his crown backward. Blood, brain matter, and bundles of hair painted a whole new stinking design on the dresses of those sitting near him. Everything from the king's jaw up had completely disappeared, leaving only what one would identify as his tongue, and the row of teeth on his lower jaw. Sent tumbling back by the shockwave, Shizu witnessed an inverted scene of the king's head, rupturing behind the downpour of glass shards. What he saw next was a sphere of deep red instantly engulfing on the whole royal box. Then, his head and back landed heavily on the floor. As the red mist cleared, Shizu realized that the king of this country had been murdered by the bullet that Kino fired. He knew before anyone else did, Kino included. My goodness. Shizu whispered. He felt a sharp pain run through his head, suffering a spell of dizziness. And so he kept still, pretending to be unconscious. The spectators silenced their chorus after Kino had fired the shot. They needed some time to process what had just happened. Some of them heard a shriek from the royal box, from which the occupants could be seen rushing out of while vomiting. Before long, the realization of the king's death swept across the spectator platforms like the children's game of telephone. Meanwhile, Kino put the clattering cannon into its holster and picked up the woodsman. Making sure that it was not damaged, it was then holstered as well. Clueless as to what they should be doing, all of the spectators simply murmured among themselves. Kino looked around once at the whole spectating crowd, spread both arms out wide, and proceeded to declare. Everyone. It is regrettable, but His Majesty the King has passed away from a stray bullet. I offer my condolences. That said, I have won the contest. I have become a citizen. And with privilege of a victor, I shall declare my new law. Without a king, this country will have no order. Therefore, I see that it is necessary to decide on a new king. Starting now, everyone in this country shall participate in a countrywide contest. The last one left standing will be the new king. Those who do not fight will be stripped of their citizenship the moment they leave the country. This is the new law. For a brief moment, the whole Colosseum fell dead silent. A very brief moment indeed. Kino walked to the entranceway, where Hermes was. Shizu was still down on the ground, and Kino kicked his shoulder while on the way. That hurt. I beg your pardon. I'll be leaving the country now, so if you want to be a citizen, do feel free. The Colosseum was now wrapped up in roars and screams. Persuader shots could be heard all over. As Kino reached where Hermes was. I knew you were up to something. Anyway, welcome back. The middle-aged soldier, who was next to Hermes, turned to Kino and spoke up. Why, you're a great fighter, you know that? How about join up with me? You can be the king. And I'll be the minister. While putting on the coat, Kino spoke back nonchalantly. I would rather not. We're leaving this country right now, after all. Hey, mister. You'd better get out of here right now if you don't want to die. Kino started Hermes's engine.the rumble echoed from the concrete walls. The soldier looked as if he was about to say something. Later, mister. But Hermes cut him off. Kino took off on the Matorid. They ran off and were gone in a blink of an eye. Shizu climbed up the tier platforms one step at a time, moving on slowly. His expression was, for some reason, completely blank. All over the place, brawls, technically one-sided slaughters, had broken out, without an end in sight. A man approached Shizu, who ignored everything and walked on absent-mindedly. "You've got mad skills, man. If we fight together as partners, we'll have a great time, I'm sure. How about it?" The man said, but Shizu ignored this too. He didn't even give the stranger a glance. "Hey, get 'em, boys." As the man said that, several minion-ish men wielding axes and metal pipes stepped forward, rushing at Shizu from both sides. Shizu turned to his right and silently unsheathed his katana. He stabbed the man behind him over his left shoulder and, on the return swing, cleaved the head of the man in front of him. He ignored those who ran away. Still holding his katana, Shizu kept climbing the tiered platforms, and before long, he was stepping into the field of shattered glass. As he set foot into the royal box, squishes could be heard as shreds of brain matter were trampled on. Shizu regarded the king, still slumped in his chair, a head shorter than he used to be. The king's loose tongue listlessly hung down, as if he was sticking his tongue out in a taunt. Shizu smiled, albeit only faintly. He let out a long, slow sigh. And so he muttered, "It has been a long time." Kino rode Hermes down a path in the forest. When they came across a lake, Kino brought Hermes to a stop. Getting down from Hermes, Kino sat down on the grass near the shore. "It's beautiful," Hermes said, gazing at the serene waters. Its surface reflected the lush green forest and the blue sky. Kino threw a pebble, landing it in the water with a plop. Ripples spread out across the surface, ceasing shortly thereafter. "Say, Kino. What's up, Hermes?" Hermes did not answer immediately. For a while, they let themselves be wrapped in the singing of birds. Then, Hermes finally went on. "A while ago, well, a pretty long while ago. We met a couple in a horse-drawn carriage, didn't we?" Yeah. Kino tossed another pebble. "As I recall, they said there was a wonderful country in the vast forest to the west. And that they were headed there." That's what they said, yeah. "Then later, we met the wife again somewhere, didn't we?" "Just the wife, alone." Yeah. "If I'm not remembering wrong, the woman smiled at you and said, it was truly a wonderful country. You should make sure to visit it, Kino, didn't she?" Yeah. "That's right." From somewhere nearby, Kino picked up a rock the size of a baby's head and hurled it. With a great splash, it sent an elegant ripple spreading across the lake's surface, swaying and distorting the mirrored world. Kino watched it. But it didn't last forever. Before long, the lake surface was back to how it once was, back to being a tranquil mirror. "All right then." Kino stood up, dusted pants, and stared at the lake for another moment. The reflection was of a thin face with unkempt black hair. When Kino was about to get back on Hermes, the sound of an engine could be heard from afar. "It's a Cheneth buggy. Just one." Hermes identified it solely by its engine sound. Suddenly, a low-riding dune buggy emerged from the forest, drawing to a stop in front of Kino and Hermes. Sitting in the driver's seat was Shizu. In the seat next to him was a big dog with thick white fur. It was an adorable one indeed, with large almond-shaped eyes and a face that seemed to be locked in a smile. "Hey there, Kino." With a smile, Shizu called out from the driver's seat. "Hello." Shizu cut his buggy's engine, took off his goggles, and got down from the vehicle, leaving his katana on his seat. He stood before Kino. "I was hoping I'd see you again." "Is that so? It's too bad you couldn't become a citizen." "No, it's fine. That aside, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Kino produced a dubious expression. "Yes, that's right." Having said that, Shizu then bowed deeply. "You did in my stead what I'd wanted to do when I become a citizen. For killing my father, you have my heartfelt gratitude." Then, while looking at Kino right in the eye, "Thank you." Kino said nothing. Instead, "You're a prince?" Hermes exclaimed. "Was. Not anymore. Truth be told, I'd planned to win, and while I was being awarded my medal, to cut that man down right on the spot. For 7 years, too. And thanks to you, Kino, now I've got free time on my hands." Shizu smiled awkwardly. Kino said quietly, "Revenge. It's so ludicrous." Shizu nodded lightly, still smiling. "Yes, so ludicrous indeed." Both of them fell silent for a time. "What will you be doing from now on?" Kino asked Shizu, who was already back in his driver's seat. "From now on, huh? I'll try wandering around until I find something I want to do. For the moment, we'll be heading north, I guess. All we've been to until now were cold places, you see." Isn't that right, Riku? He said, patting the dog sitting in the passenger seat. It seemed to named Riku. If you say so, Master Shizu. Riku said. And right that moment. No way, Hermes exclaimed. The dog spoke. How? Riku thereupon rose up in a conspicuous fit of the sulks, then retorted in a brusque expression. What was that? What's wrong with a talking dog? Pretty damn uppity for just a matorid, aren't you? WH? What did you just say? HMPH. You're just a vehicle that can't even run on your own. If you've got a problem, then why don't you try catching me yourself? Riku, still keeping up his cute face, threw out word after scathing word. Why, you're one to talk, you can't even live without staying in a pack. Worse, you're born sick in the head, obsessed with trying to be leader. If you're got a problem, then bite me. Got the teeth to do it? Hermes, taking it all too seriously, launched a counter-offense. What's that, huh? Wanna go? Stop it, Riku. Enough already, Hermes. Shizu and Kino spoke up simultaneously. Riku, on the verge of leaping forward, sat right down and gave Kino a look of respect. I am called Riku, loyal servant of Master Shizu. I was honored to spectate your performance in the final round. Results aside, it was your doing that our matters were settled without Master Shizu being killed. Thank you very much. Kino smiled awkwardly, saying, You're welcome. Then turned to Shizu and asked, He's cute. May I pet him? The master waved his hand, signaling a go-ahead. Kino crouched to hug the dog, running both hands through his thick fur. In turn, Riku licked Kino's mouth and cheek. Watching Riku enjoying Kino's hug, Hermes grumbled, albeit too quietly for anyone else to hear. HMPH. Damn pervy dog. Kino petted Riku for a moment, then took notice of something left lying around carelessly under the passenger seat. Excuse me. Kino reached to pick it up. It was the crown, worn by the king just a short while ago. Oh, that. It's a memento of my grandfather, so I brought it with me. Shizu whispered. Kino stroked Riku's fur one last time, then turned to Shizu. Well, I don't know whether or not I'm being out of line for saying this, but are you not going to become king? I'm not. Why not? A man who intended to kill his own father has no right to be king. You think so? Holding the crown in both hands, Kino silently and gently placed it on the young man's head. Doesn't fit me, does it? Kino gazed at him for a moment, then spoke up nonchalantly. Probably doesn't, yes. Kino mounted Hermes, started the engine, tucked in the coat's excess length, and put on goggles. Kino. If you don't mind, how about come with us to the town to the north? I know the way. Shizu called out from his buggy's driver's seat. The crown was still on his head. No, I would rather not. There's another place I have to go to. Besides? I was told not to carelessly go along with men I don't know. As confusion showed on Shizu's face, Riku whispered something to him. For a moment, the young man seemed astonished, turning around to exchange a few words with the dog. He then looked back at Kino again, smiled, and lightly shook his head. Ah, yes, of course. I understand. This will be where we part ways, then. It would be nice if we were to meet again somewhere, Kino, Hermes. Yes. Do take care. You too, Riku. Thank you very much. Riku replied, and Hermes wasted not a second to poke fun at it. Later, pervy dog. See ya, Rustbeakit. HMPH. Shizu and Riku watched the Matorid run off until it was out of sight. Shizu, down from his buggy again, stood at the edge of the lake. As he looked down, a reflection of the young man, wearing the same crown as that man, looked back at him. Before he could decide whether or not it suited him, Riku began to lap the surface of the water at his feet. Tiny waves swayed and distorted Shizu's mirrored image. Shizu turned around, looking past his buggy at the vast forest. He could not see beyond it, he could no longer see the country in which he was born. He then looked at the driver's seat at his katana, which he had placed at its side. Before he realized it, Riku was sitting at his side, regarding him with utmost respect. What do you think I should do, Riku? Shizu muttered, posing a question to his loyal companion. Try as I may, I could never lead your way, Master Shizu. Riku resolutely declared. Shizu, putting on a calm face, muttered. Right. Then, for one last time, he looked back toward the country once shrouded away by the forest. Chapter 5. The Country of Adults' Natural Rights. When I met the traveler who was called Kino, I was 11 years old and still living in the country where I was born. Truth be told, I can no longer remember what I was called back then. I only vaguely remember that it was the name of some flower, and that if its pronunciation was changed slightly, it would become a mean insult. For that, I was often made fun of. The traveler Kino, who came to my country on foot, was a person of tall stature and thin physique. The young gate guard soldier was troubled for a moment, contemplating whether or not to let the traveler in. He contacted his superiors, then, after a while, received a reply. Before he was led into town, the soldier forced him to apply a powdery white insect repellent to his head. All the while, from when he waited with the soldier to when he walked right up to me, I never took my eyes off him. By then, the sun was already setting, and his long shadow reached all the way to my feet and extended past me. He was wearing a type of boot that I had never seen before. His legs were thin, and so was his body. He wore a black jacket and a long brown coat covered in dirt, so dusty that it seemed to be fresh off the ground. A single tattered bag, carried on his shoulder, was the entirety of his luggage. He was so tall indeed. Although I was the tallest among my circle of friends back then, he still stooped slightly to speak to me. "Hey there, little miss. Good day to you." His cheeks were sunken, his short hair disheveled. White powder still clung to the strands. "My name is Kino. I travel from place to place. What's your name?" Being short and easy to say, I thought Kino was a nice name. Better than some odd flower's name, at the very least. Anyhow, I told him my name. "It's a nice name. By the way, XXX my name. Is there a hotel in town? It'd be nice if it's a cheap place that has a shower. Please do tell me if you happen to know any. I'm already spent for the day. There's my place." Kino smiled happily. At the time, my father ran a cheap hotel. So I led Kino to my home. When father first saw Kino, he had a look of strong disapproval on his face. That look then quickly changed to a smile as he left the counter to lead the new guest to his room. Kino carried his large bag in his arms, thanked me, and made his way up the stairs. I then went back to my own room. Stuck on the wall was a large piece of paper with 3 more days written on it in big red letters. I recall waking up around noon the next day. No one, not even my father and mother, had come to wake me up. It was my final week after all. The paper in my room now read 2 more days. I washed my face at my room's washstand. Hearing a noise from outside, I went out to the rear garden. The vicinity was occupied by a heap of junk, full of useless, old, discarded machineries. I clearly remember playing around here, with the heap obscuring the evening sun. The area would quickly go dark. In front of the scrap heap, Kino was crouching down, hammering on something. It was a wheel rim. Not the thick kind which goes on cars, but a thin one which goes on motoreds. Note: 2-wheeled vehicles. Refers to only ones that cannot fly. One such motored was lying in front of Kino. Noticing me, Kino said, "Hey there. Good morning, XXX." Kino's hair was all disheveled. I asked him, "What are you doing?" "I'm healing the motored. I'd asked for it to be sold to me, but they said it was an old piece of junk and that they don't need it anymore. I got it for free." "You mean repairing?" "Healing." Kino smiled as he said so, then added that it might take some time because it was quite beat up. When he had finished hammering the wheel, he attached it to the motored. For quite some time thereafter, Kino took other components and hammered them, pulled on them, tied them together, and even assembled complicated parts from the smaller pieces. I watched him for a while. Then I got hungry and went back into the house and got something to eat by myself. After the meal, I went out to watch Kino again. The motored was about halfway healed at this point. It was able to stand up properly now. It looks just like the motored I used to travel with a long time ago. He turned around for a second and told me so. He was polishing a rod-like object. "How much longer will it take?" I asked, albeit without much thought. "Let's see, I say give it another day, and it'll be able to move around, all high-spirited." "The motored is going to move around?" I asked Kino, noticing his odd choice of words. "Well, technically, it won't be moving on its own. Someone has to ride it, and a pact must be made." "What pact?" Kino looked at me and patted the motored lightly, saying, "In this case, it's a promise to help each other out." "Help each other how?" "So you see, by myself, I can't run as fast as a motored." I nodded. He was so scrawny, after all. And while motoreds can go fast, they would fall over if no one is riding them to keep their balance. So if I ride on the motored, I would serve to keep its balance. I balance, the motored runs. With that deal, our journey will be more convenient and enjoyable. I see, so that's what a pact to help each other is. That's right. So when it wakes up, I'll have to make sure to ask, "What do you say?" The motored is going to talk? Of course it will. He said, winking once. I went back to my room, poured a cup of tea, and presented it to Kino. He sipped it and said it was good. When he'd finished a little less than half of it, Kino asked. While we read it, how about we decide on a name? Got any good ideas? What was your old friend called, Kino? Hermes. That one's good. Really? Let's go with that, then. As he said that, Kino smiled happily. Back then, at the moment I looked at that face of his, I recall myself smiling as well. After that, Kino resumed healing the Matorid. Then, after keeping watch for a while, I asked. What do you do, Kino? What did you mean, what do I do? Kino replied while still facing away, keeping his hands busy. You're an adult, aren't you? Well, more of one than you are, at any rate. Adults are supposed to have some kind of job, aren't they? Kino looked confused, albeit just a little. That was the impression I had. And I understand it now. Alright, that's true. Then what kind of work do you do? Let's see, stretching it a bit, I suppose I'd say that I travel. Kino answered. So. By travel, you mean going to all kinds of different places? That's right. Is there anything you hate about it? Sometimes. But there are a lot more fun things, I'd say. Then that's not a job. As I declared so, Kino stopped his hands and turned around. Jobs are hard. They're not fun. But we must do them to live on. If there's fun in it, then traveling is not a job. I dunno. Kino murmured, tilting his head to one side. That's why tomorrow, no, the day after tomorrow, I'll be getting an operation. Operation for what? For me to turn into an adult. That's why this is my final week. I said, and Kino asked back, and what would that mean? If you don't mind, I'd like you to tell me what it is. At this point, I had become aware that Kino didn't know about the final week. It was only natural, now that I think about it. Kino was not born in this country, after all. Although it would take long, I decided that I would give an explanation. This was also because I believed Kino would listen. I'll explain everything, then. In my country, the country I'd lived in back then, I mean those who were 12 years of age or above were considered adults. In turn, those who were younger than that were children. As for the definition of being an adult, it meant people who do work. The adults would always say the following to children. You kids are free to do whatever you want. That's perfectly fine. But for us adults, doing as one pleases is not acceptable, no exceptions. It's because we have jobs. It is necessary to work in order to live on. It's the most important thing in one's lifetime. One must do their work without fail, even if they don't want to, and even if they think it's not the right thing to do. This is serious business. Then they would go on to say, but rest assured, when you kids turn 12, us adults will give you an operation. We'll open up your heads and take out the children inside all of you. Receive the operation, and you all will turn into adults overnight. Then you'll be able to do anything properly, even the things you don't like to do. So there's no need to worry, every one of you can become splendid, hard-working adults. Then your mothers and fathers will be able to relax, too. For the children set to receive the operation, the 1-week period before their 12th birthday was called their final week. The people of this country, whoever it be, are to not talk to the children going through such times. That was a set policy. It was so that the children could spend their final week as children in solitude, free from all manners of meddling. As for the reasons for such a thing to be done, no one ever explained them to me. With me wrapping up my shoddy explanation, Kino said. So that's what it is. What a cruel story. Huh? Cruel? How? It's all thanks to the operation that any child can become a proper adult, isn't it? I asked. Back then, I was genuinely puzzled. I thought, if we didn't receive the operation to become proper adults, then what in the world will we end up becoming in the future? I don't know what a proper adult is. Is one a proper adult for being able to do things they don't like? To keep on forever doing things they hate, is that what makes life fun? And to be forcibly made to do so through operations I don't really understand. With Kino saying all that, I felt an impulse to ask. Kino, you said earlier that you're more of an adult than I am, right? So are you saying that you're an adult? Not really. If we're going by your definition of adults, then absolutely not. So you're a child? Not really. Going by your definition of children, then I guess I'm not. Neither an adult nor a child? Not at all getting the logic behind it, I asked. Then what in the world are you, Kino? With that asked, Kino gave the following answer. Me? I'm Kino. A guy named Kino. I guess that's it. Oh, and I travel. Doing things you like to do? That's right. I like to travel, so I travel. I won't be able to make a living by doing just that, of course, so I sell medicinal herbs and other unusual stuff I find on the way. I suppose that could be considered a job. But fundamentally, I travel doing things I like and want to do. Doing things you like? I was very jealous of Kino. Until then, I had believed that children absolutely should have the operation and become proper, working adults. I thought choosing things to like or hate was an act reserved only for children. For me, that time was soon coming to its end. "What is it that you like the most?" Kino asked, and I answered immediately. "I like to sing." Hearing that, Kino smiled and went on. "I like to sing, too. I often sing during my journey." Saying that, Kino then started singing. I didn't catch the words due to the song's fast tempo, but I could tell that he was bad at it. When he finished singing, he said, "I did bad, didn't I?" "Yup. Very." I wholeheartedly agreed. Kino chuckled, then went on. "Still, even though I don't seem to be improving, I have fun when I sing." I understood his sentiments well. I sometimes sang when I was by myself, with no one around to hear my singing except me. So I started singing a song I liked. It was a song that started slow, then upped its tempo smoothly. I still sing this song often. When I finished singing the whole thing, Kino abruptly applauded. "You're good. I'm surprised. You're the best singer I've ever heard." Embarrassed, I thanked him. "You like to sing, and you're this good at singing, so how about becoming a singer?" Kino suggested, and I gave my answer. "I can't become a singer." "Why not?" "Because my mother and father aren't singers." Adults give birth to children so that they would have someone to take over their jobs, right? Things have always been this way. In this country, it was the norm for children to succeed their parents' jobs when they became adults. An obligation, so to speak. "I see, so that's the way of this country." Kino muttered so with regret in his voice, then turned back to concentrate on healing the meteorid. I went back to my room. That night, I lay in my bed, thinking. I had always believed that the best thing to do was to receive the operation and become an adult. But now, I suddenly felt that it was also unnatural for one to not do the things they liked, all the while not being able to say that they hated the things they hated. And continuing to be that way for the rest of their lives. It was just as Kino said. I thought about it. Then, in one way or another, I reached a conclusion. I didn't want to keep on being a child forever, but if I was going to become an adult, I wanted to become one by myself. Not to be forcibly turned into an adult in the same way as the others, even if the order and timing were all messed up, but to become one by myself. The kind of adult I find agreeable, with methods I find agreeable. And I wanted to choose a job that I was good at, or one that I liked, or even both at the same time. The next morning, when I woke, the note stuck in my room now read "Last day." I went down to the first floor and caught hold of my parents' attention. They were not allowed to initiate a conversation with me, but it was fine if I were the one who spoke first. I rewound everything I'd thought about the night before. I don't want to have an operation to become an adult. Is there any other way to become one? A way to become an adult and keep being my current self? And ended up saying everything so inadvertently. Those words were to radically change the course of my destiny and Kino's as well. As they heard that, my parents produced an expression as if they were experiencing a nightmare. My father suddenly started to yell. "You fool. Do you even realize what you're saying, you wicked child? Why are you making fools of those who had the operation to become splendid adults, taking us adults for complete fools? Do you plan to stay a brat your whole life and never grow up?" As if the melody part was being passed on to another instrument, my mother followed up, her manner of speaking like a lashing whip. "Apologize to everyone, XXX apologize, I say. Apologize. To your father. To everyone. Say sorry to all the adults in this country. Beg them to forgive your foolish whims. Tell them you're mistaken about what you just said. Tell them you'll never say such a thing ever again." Now. Thinking about it now, the two of them must have gone completely hysterical. It was serious business for them, to the point that they did not write it off as a mere child spewing nonsense. The fact that, up until then, no one had been able to oppose going through the operation that they had been forced to receive it, made them convince themselves that it was a wonderful thing. A defense mechanism to protect their peace of mind, I suppose. Not that I was in a position to make such comments, having not received the operation and all. Why would you suddenly say something like that? Who in the world taught you these inhuman ways of thinking? My father continued to yell, as if he had gone mad. Back then, I was so taken aback that I did not even have the intention to answer. But if he were to calmly think it over like an adult should, I'm sure he would figure that it was the traveler, Kino. Hearing the commotion, nearby adults began to gather around. Is something wrong? What's happening? You all are being so loud. The adults spoke to my parents in a reproachful manner, telling them it was unacceptable for adults to behave the way they were doing. However, my father declared. Apologies. Truth is, my foolish daughter suddenly started saying the most frightful of things. She wishes not to undergo her operation tomorrow. And in response, those adults. What? Inconceivable. It's all because you raised your child the wrong way. It's your fault. You can say that again. Wishing to become an adult without an operation, that's heresy. What do you take the magnificent operation for? You might be a kid, but some things are unforgivable. They began to shout, as if something inside them had been broken. We do beg your pardon. All this is the doing of our unworthiness. Saying that, my parents apologized profusely under the surrounding pressure, then turned to glare at me. You have brought shame upon us, saying those stupid things. Ah. It's that filthy traveler. He's the one who put these foolish ideas in your head. Finally realizing it, my father pulled me along as he went all over the place in search of Kino. Kino was outside the entrance. Standing beside him was the Matorid, shining like new as if it had just been bought. The same Matorid that had been junked the day before last. Kino's oversized baggage was strapped tight to the back seat, shaking in perfect sync with the engine's vibrations. The back wheel didn't touch the ground, instead spinning while suspended in the air. Draped across the seat was the brown coat Kino had been wearing when he came into town. It was slightly cleaner now. My father screamed at him. Hey, you there. Damn filthy traveling bastard. As if he already saw it coming, Kino ignored the name calling. With that, my father sprang up in a fit of rage, screaming in unintelligible words. He sounded more like a barking dog. Kino looked my way and said quietly. This is what the operation gets you? Perhaps you're better off without it, after all. He winked. I unintentionally spurted out a giggle. In an instant, the inside of my head felt clear and serene. You. My father pointed at Kino, spittle and froth flying from his mouth as he shouted. Finally, Kino looked at my father and asked, what is it? Don't what is it me? On your knees, now. And apologize to me, to my wife, and to all of the people of this country. Apologize, I say. Apologize? What for? Kino asked back in an expression of calmness. In answer, my father howled in unintelligible words once again. His face was red, and his whole body shook. I looked at him at a person who identified as a proper adult. Truth be told, I saw no difference in that look of his from mine when I'd cried and screamed after having a fight over mundane things with my friends. As my father poised for more yelling, or perhaps more howling. Now, I must ask you to leave it at that. Someone called out to my father. That person was a high-ranking official in the country. Back then, I didn't know what the official title was, being so hard to remember and all. But the person was an official, that's for sure. Appearing as one among the crowd of adults who had gathered around the commotion without me noticing, the official initiated a conversation with Kino. Dear traveler, every country, every household, they all have their own distinctive customs. You understand, do you not? Kino answered. Yes, I understand. This country, too, has its customs. They are not to be meddled with by your activities. Am I wrong? The official asked, and Kino shrugged, saying, well, that's true. He then took a quick look around at his surroundings. I was just thinking about making my departure soon. I have a feeling that I'm going to be killed if I stay any longer. He said, seemingly cracking a joke. Are there any procedures I must go through before leaving? The official told him there were no such things, then continued. If you head straight that way, you will reach the gate, it is open. You will be able to leave through there. At any rate, being killed is an unthinkable scenario, since you have entered this country through official procedures. Until you are through the gate, your safety is guaranteed. This is the country of adults, after all. The official said, pointing at one of the streets which extended past the Matorid. Kino turned toward me, crouched down, and said as he looked into my face. This is goodbye, then XXX. You're leaving already? I asked him, why not stay for 2 or 3 more days? In the case that I ended up receiving the operation, I wanted to know what attitude would I be having toward Kino when I talked to him afterwards. I wanted to try talking to Kino after becoming an adult. However, Kino said, it's my policy to stay only 3 days. I lightly waved at him, and Kino started climbing aboard the Matorid. But then my father approached me, carrying a long, thin kitchen knife. My mother was right next to him. Kino turned around. My father looked at the official. The official nodded. I was clueless as to why my father would bring a kitchen knife outside when standing right before me, no less. I found the sight to be quite comical. Kino asked the official, why is that man carrying a kitchen knife? The official, in a tone completely unchanged from before, spoke the most ridiculous of things. Let me explain to you, then, as a special case. It is for the disposal of his daughter. Color drained from Kino's face. I did not immediately understand what was happening, however. I only heard Kino's voice of surprise. What? Like I said, disposal. The girl has denied the magnificent operation and disobeyed her parents, disobeyed those above her. We cannot afford to leave such a child to her own devices. Children are, at all times and in all cases, the possessions of their parents. Parents created their children, and it is within their natural rights to dispose of their failed creations. With the officials saying that, I finally realized that I was going to be killed. But even though it was true that I knew it, and that I did not want to die, there was nothing I could do about it. I looked up and saw my father looking back down at me in disdain. The failed creation. He grumbled. Dear traveler. It is dangerous here. Please step aside. The official said, and at the same time, my father brandished his knife and made a lunge at me. The blade could be seen shining in silver. Ah, how beautiful, I thought. Kino rushed in from the side, attempting to restrain my father. At that moment, as my world went silent and time slowed down to a crawl, I looked on, realizing that the knife would stab me before Kino would reach my father. Thank you. But you won't make it in time. Time crawled on in the silent world. The knife was about to pierce right through me when my father twisted it to his left side. The blade turned from its vertical position to horizontal. As Kino dove in, it caught him in the chest and pierced right through. Gah! Sound returned, and I heard Kino's strange cry. Kino was leaning against my father, as if clinging on to him. The tip of the kitchen knife could be seen protruding from Kino's back. Kino fell over face up, knife and all, with a dull thud. He laid still. I knew he was already dead. Unable to think, I took a few steps away, my back colliding with the Matorid. Silence persisted for a short while. Then, my father. Heh. He was laughing. Then he went on to say, "Oh? This person jumped in between us, and the knife man for killing the kid stabbed him instead. What judgment should we have on this incident?" I knew full well that my father was giving a half-baked excuse. The other adults there must have known, too. The official started speaking. The traveler did jump in so suddenly, so I suppose there is nothing that can be done. It was not as if you were intending to kill him. This is an accident. A very unfortunate accident. You are not guilty. Is that not right, everyone? The adults around them agreed unanimously and chimed in, "That's right. No mistaking it. How unfortunate of him." But of course," my father said, happy and relieved. Although I knew I was soon to be killed, for me to die without receiving the operation to become a proper adult, I was glad. Right before my eyes, I witnessed my father attempting to pull the knife out of Kino's corpse. But it would not come out, so my mother gave him a hand. The hilt was covered in blood, so they wrapped it with a piece of cloth and pulled, little by little, SHNK. Thinking about it now, I feel as if that time frame was Kino's final gift to me. As my parents worked together on the pulling, a little voice from behind entered my ears. It sounded like the voice of a younger boy. "Have you ever ridden a bicycle?" I whispered back. "I have." Then I heard the following. "You'll die if you stay here, right?" I answered. "Yeah. But I'd rather die than stay alive and go through the operation. It's all the same anyway." SHNK. By this point, about half of the kitchen knife was out. So you want to die? To the question, I have an honest answer. I'd like to not die, if I had a choice. Then, the little voice said, "Take the third choice." "What's that?" SHNK. Almost all of the knife was out. But I felt perfectly calm, listening on the complicated things the little voice suddenly started saying. "First, jump on the Matorid behind you. Grab the handle with both hands and hold tight. Twist your right hand toward yourself and lean your body forward. Think of it as a fast, heavy bicycle. SCHWNK. The knife slid out of Kino's corpse, and my father and mother fell over backward. Oh, the adults around them cried out in alarm, then proceeded to laugh without restraint. Blood gushed up like a fountain for a brief moment, then subsided. "If I do that, then what?" To the little voice, I asked loudly. The surrounding adults looked at me with a dubious expression on their faces. My father held a bloodstained kitchen knife tightly in his bloodstained hands, looking at me with a smile on his face. I saw the condition my father was in at the time as absolutely repulsive, but I felt no fear. I am not like him. "Run away." I heard the voice, now loud and clear. Spinning around and leaping onto the Matorid seat, I caught a mere glimpse of my father rushing toward me. As I had been told earlier, I twisted the right hand grip and leaned forward. Thump, the Matorid landed on the ground in front of it. At the same time, the engine roared to life, vroom. My body was thrown backward. So as to not fall, I clung on tight to the handles. The crowd of adults dispersed, each one of them stepping back. It was then when I realized that I was riding a motorrad by myself. I steadied the handles lightly, just like when I rode my bicycle down a bumpy road. Although this road was a flat one, the speed kept increasing, more and more. It felt strange, but I got used to it soon enough. You're doing good. Keep it up. I could still hear the voice. Hold the tank firmly with your thighs. That'll keep you steady. From now, shift the gears just as I tell you. I did as I was instructed. Suddenly, the wind blowing at my face became more intense, sending tears streaming from my eyes. The gate came into view before me, becoming bigger and bigger. When I heard a strong whoosh, the gate passed over my head. Outside the gate, on the grass-covered plain, a single tawny path extended onward. From the day I was born, this was the first time I had ever been out of the country. The wind stung my eyes, but I soon came to pay it no mind. Breaking into an exhausted sob, I rode on. I don't even know how much time had passed. Hey, don't you think we've gone far enough? I came back to myself following the sudden initiation of a conversation. Do what I tell you from now. As I was being instructed, I frantically fumbled around, doing things like pulling on a lever with my left hand and moving my right foot at something, and the motorrad gradually slowed down. When the timing seemed good for stopping, I stuck out my feet. On a bicycle, my toes would have lightly touched the ground, and all would be well, but this time, my soles felt an overwhelming weight. I momentarily paused in confusion, my body heeling over to my left. Yua. I heard the voice. My left hand was dragged down as it still gripped the handle, and I fell to the ground. At the same time, a gachink could be heard. Oh, the cruelty. Who on earth was the one who committed such a cruel act? The voice asked in jest, directing the question at me, laying on my back and looking up at the sky. The empty, blue sky. Then, I rose up. Taking a look around at my surroundings, I saw that I was standing in the center of a field, where red flowers bloomed in profusion. The field was a wide one. When I looked back along the route that the motorrad's wheels made over the flowers, I could no longer see the country in which I was born. Kino. I muttered. The images of Kino's final moments, lying face up with a kitchen knife through his chest, flashed in my eyes, then faded away. Oddly, I was not sad at all. I shed no tears. Perhaps they had already been used up for the time being. I was not in pain, nor was I feeling happy. I simply stood there in a daze. Excuse me. I could hear a voice from near my feet. I looked down and saw the motorrad lying on its side. You're a cruel one, you know that? Come again? I'd like to be stood up right about now, if you please. It was then when it first crossed my mind that the owner of the voice had been the motorrad all along. Ah, so it was you. I said, and the motorrad sounded a little angry. Aha, isn't it obvious? There's nobody else here, is there? Right. Sorry. No need to say sorry, I just want to stand up. The motorrad acted up like a spoiled child all of a sudden. I found it strangely amusing. I did as the motorrad asked, crouching down and pressing my chest against the seat, then pulling it up with all my strength. Red flower petals scattered. Then I put my foot on the protrusion near the rear wheel and applied pressure on it, pushing it down as the motorrad stood up. The motorrad moved backward over the stand and didn't topple over again when I let go. Thanks. The motorrad expressed its gratitude in good manners. You're welcome. I answered in kind. Things got real dangerous back there, didn't it? The motorrad said, but for a second, I had no idea what it meant. Then I remembered the knife, shining bright. It was as if I had recalled a lost memory from years long past. It sure did. Thank you for saving me, I said, and the motorrad replied. Same goes the other way. If I'd been left there, who knows what would have happened to me. You really saved me by riding me out here, Kino. Hearing that, I thought for a moment about the pact to help each other out. Then, curious as to why I was being called what the motorrad just called me, I asked. What did you just call me? I called you Kino. Why? When I asked you your name a moment ago, you said Kino, didn't you? I intended to say my name, but I felt as if that name was no longer one of my own. That name of mine, a child who lived in that country without a care in the world. A child who believed one had to have an operation when they turned 12 in order to become a proper adult. That person no longer existed in this world. So I said, as I trampled on the red flowers, taking a step closer to the motorrad. I'm Kino. My name is Kino. It's a nice name, isn't it? Yeah, I like it. Say, what about my name? Got anything? The motorrad asked, and I thought back to the name both of us had decided on. Hermes. Your name is Hermes. The name of old Kino's friend. Hermes not bad, I guess. Hermes said, then proceeded to repeat that name again and again. Hermes, how liking it, I'm sure. Hermes then asked me. So, what are we gonna do now? We stood there, in the center of a sea of red. All the while, I had no answers. Afterwards, we decided to first head for a nearby country, but we ended up getting lost in a forest. There, we met a certain elderly person by chance, and were taught various things. If I hadn't met that person, I wouldn't have ended up becoming who I am now, I'm sure. I hold sincere gratitude for that person, so much that they could not be expressed in words. But that is another story for another time. Chapter 6. The Peaceful Country Mother's Love. A lone motored, note, two-wheel vehicles. Refers to only ones that cannot fly, ran down the single road through the wasteland. Two mountains could be seen to their right, and one far away to their left. All were bare of trees. The road was of the same brown as the surrounding land, and were it not for the occasional large cans that dotted the shoulder of the road, it would have been impossible to distinguish the path from the wilderness. The motorrad sped its way through such a road, however uneven it may be. Long, thick clouds of dirt were raised in its wake. At this point, the rider would likely not be able to see anything behind them. Travel luggage had been fully loaded onto the motorrad's rear carrier. The bag and the sleeping bag were fastened together with bands and nets, and there was one silver cup, hanging from the net and swaying around. The rider was wearing a coat of the same color as the earth, its excess length tied around both thighs. Worn on the rider's head was a hat which resembled that of an aviator's. It was attached with a small visor on its front, and on its sides were ear flaps, the ends of which were tied together at its wearer's chin. Worn on the eyes was a pair of chipped silver-framed goggles, and wrapped around the face was a bandana for protection against dirt. Although one would not be able to see the rider's facial appearance at this time, the person was quite visibly skinny. Noticing something, the rider throttled down the motorrad speed. When the cloud of dirt that danced behind and around them had lessened considerably, the rider stopped the motorrad, then took a good look at the things which blanketed both sides of the road. "What's up with those?" the motorrad asked. "They're human corpses, no matter how you look at them." The rider answered. Those things were brown and piled up all over the place. One would have mistaken them as dried wood at a glance. However, the outlines of limbs and heads could also be seen attached. Many of them were in pieces, some only having their lower half left, and there were also detached arms scattered about. All of them had been dried up in the arid climate, filling the wasteland as nature made mummies. Varying in size, there were so many of them piled together that one would not see the ground. "I know that much, Kino. I was asking why there are so many mummies lying around here. It's strange." "I don't know, Hermes. Perhaps this place is a graveyard." The motorrad's rider, referred to as Kino, answered bluntly. In turn, the motorrad, referred to as Hermes, followed up, "Oh, I get it," and proceeded to assume a know-it-all persona. "If it's a graveyard, wouldn't they be buried instead? This is a food reserve, for sure." "Food reserve?" "That's right. The meat can be kept around longer when dried. When they get hungry, they come here and bring the meat back to eat. And by they, I mean the people of the country up we're heading toward, of course. These things are like the junkies in your bag, Kino." "Jerkies?" "Yeah, that," Hermes said, falling silent momentarily, then perking up again. Thus poor Kino was caught and eaten in the country of cannibals. Young, fresh meat is always better, after all. Well, you're probably a bit sinewy, but you'll be edible if they boil you enough. Thus our journey came to its end. I wanted to run some more. After Hermes was done talking, Kino spoke up. "Hermes, you're super bored, aren't you?" "Yup. Hang in there for a little longer. We'll be arriving at the next country soon," Kino said, then took off on Hermes. The flanking piles of corpses continued on for a while. What kind of soon was that? It's already noon. When Hermes started complaining so, the country's wall finally came into view. They ran on further, soon arriving in front of the gate, on which "Welcome to Vildelval" had been written. "We welcome you to Vildelval. It has been a long time since we last had a visitor," the gatekeeping soldier said, saluting with a smile. "I'm Kino. This here is my partner, Hermes. We'd like to request entry for sightseeing and recreation," Kino said, holding out a pass card. The soldier accepted it with both hands and put it into the inspection machine. The card re-emerged quickly, and the soldier handed it back to Kino with both hands. "No problem at all. For how many days would you like to stay?" When Kino answered that they would be staying 3 days, leaving the day after the next, the soldier said it was fine if they stayed longer, before writing something down on the official documents. The soldier then asked, "Are you carrying any persuaders, note, firearms, with you?" "Yes." The coat Kino had on had been taken off and draped over Hermes. Worn underneath the coat was a black jacket, collar upturned. Around Kino's waist was a thick belt with several small pouches on it. From the right thigh holster, Kino took out the hand persuader and placed it on the countertop. Then, with left hand reaching for the backside of the waist, another one was presented. The soldier's eyes widened. Now this is a surprise, Kino. For you to possess such amazing pieces of craft. The soldier looked at the weapons in admiration. The one which had been presented first was a single-action revolver, the type of which bullets and liquid propellant were loaded in separately. Looking closely, it was currently ready for firing. Kino called it cannon. The other one was a semi-automatic persuader of thin silhouette which utilized .22 LR rimfire cartridges. It was apparent that both of them had been used extensively. However, they were not dirty and had been oiled properly. The soldier asked on the spur of the moment. "Are you ranked, by any chance, Kino?" "Black belt, 4th Dan." The one who promptly answered was not Kino, but Hermes. "Wow, you have my respect. Since you're ranked, feel free to take these in with you. I'm sure you won't be needing them, though, since this country is safe. All that aside, we welcome you both with all our hearts, Kino and Hermes. We hope for your stay to be a pleasant one. Here is a map of the country. May it be of use." "Thank you very much," Kino said, holstering the persuaders and accepting the map. The soldier saluted, and Kino pushed Hermes along as the gate rattled open. Surrounded by a crowd immediately upon emerging into the country, Kino promptly shrunk back for a brief moment. Men and women, young and old, looked at Kino and Hermes, shouting with smiles on their faces, "Thank you for coming. Happy to have you here." There were those who played instruments, and also those who started dancing. Hermes vacantly whispered, so as to let only Kino hear. "Ah, we're really gonna get eaten after all. Everyone looks so hungry." Afterwards, Kino asked the welcoming residents whether or not there was a hotel that is not too expensive, with space for Hermes and a shower. One among them suggested a hotel to the south, which had a shower, but another argued that it was too expensive, prompting others to chime in their suggestions. The exchange went on for a while. The hotel recommended by the person who seemed to have won the debate, which fulfilled all of Kino's criteria, stood next to a considerably old building with a sign proclaiming it to be the History Museum. Kino was initially refused at the hotel's doorsteps, with an employee telling the traveler to first dust off the coat and baggage, and also wash Hermes clean with a water hose at the entrance. Hermes suggested, "This is a good time to change my spark plug, don't you think, dear friend Kino?" But was ignored. Kino then proceeded to the room, taking a shower and getting a change of clothes and underwear. The hotel's restaurant served a kind of fish that Kino had never seen before, but it turned out to be very delicious. "So you're the traveler who just arrived today? Have you been to the History Museum yet? You should check out the History Museum. Spend half a day there, and you'll know all there is to know about this country. The curator there is a very kind person. She'll teach you many things about our history, I'm sure." Kino, in a jacket, simply wandered around town, pushing the baggage-free Hermes along. Everyone and anyone they came across recommended that they took a trip to the History Museum. And whenever they asked for interesting places in town, the answer they get would always be the History Museum. In the end they decided, albeit reluctantly, that they would pay it a visit. When they passed the front of the hotel, an employee called out to them, saying, "The History Museum is a very informative place. Why not pay it a visit?" And when Kino replied, "We're actually on our way there," the employee immediately rushed back to the front desk and brought them discount tickets. The History Museum building was of traditional folk construction, composed of overlapping arches. Its entranceway was terribly dark, but looking through it revealed a bright and spacious interior. Kino bought the tickets then went in, and once inside, one woman came out to welcome them. She may be elderly and white-haired, but her figure was slim, and her back was straight. She seemed to be quite the kind, wise person. The woman spoke, her voice well projected. "Welcome, dear visitors, to our History Museum. I am the curator." "Good day to you, curator. I'm Kino. This here is my partner, Hermes." Kino gave an introduction of themselves, and Hermes politely greeted the curator as well. For a while thereafter, Kino and Hermes toured the museum under the curator's guidance. There were no other visitors. So as to enable convenient viewing for wheelchair-bound visitors, the interior had been outfitted with ramps, and the height of the exhibits were carefully planned out. Kino was able to push Hermes around everywhere throughout the tour. Each and every one of the exhibits were well crafted. They included painstakingly detailed models depicting the country through the ages, from the time when the first people settled down in the wasteland, to the process of the town's expansion and advancement. numerous tools essential for their daily lives throughout those times, and even a legitimate copy of the first newspaper issue they ever published. The explanations were easy to understand, comprising of a good balance of text, musical cues, and visuals. Furthermore, for any word Kino and Hermes couldn't read, the curator would provide them with thorough explanations. Kino enthusiastically observed everything. Eventually, they were nearing the modem history section. There, the tone of the displays changed, so abruptly and drastically. Where the focus of the earlier displays had been on uplifting subjects such as the people's ways of lives and cultural heritage, the exhibits from this point on featured weapons and protective gear, depictions of battlefields, and everything connected with war. To start with, the explanatory note at the entrance of the section read, "War with a neighboring country begins the history of slaughter. From this point on is our history of war." The curator said, expression unchanged. For many years, this country had been sporadically at war with a neighboring country. The two countries were completely different, be it in religion, way of life, race, language, everything. It was all too easy for them to view each other with mutual hostility, and once a war had broken out, the hostility escalated further. Both countries had always intended to destroy the other. For that purpose, they waged one war after another. However, neither side was able to annihilate the other. Battles raged on in the vast wilderness, but the victors never had enough resources remaining to invade the enemy nation thereafter. A state of suspended hostile activities would be in effect for a time, then, as if they had remembered their conflicts, the army's marches would commence once again. They would continue to do battle, exhausting their respective nations' assets, and ending the war with the final victor undecided. This country and the neighboring country had been in such a relationship, the beginning of which was 192 years ago. I see. Are the mummies in the wasteland casualties of war, by any chance? Hermes asked, and the curator answered. No, they are not. We cremate the remains of our dead. Our neighbor does as well. Before Hermes could ask what they were, Kino asked while looking at some other materials. Curator. From reading this text, I take it that the section of the exhibit ends at around 15 years ago? And at the present, this country does look quite affluent and stable. In fact, it has been a while since we visited a place so peaceful. Yes, it is as you said. At the present, this country is a very stable one indeed. I suppose you could tell that much just from observing the people as expected of a traveler. The curator said, without irony in her words. Does that mean there is no longer any conflict with the neighboring country? Yes, there is none. Although we do not interact much, there is no killing between us. Kino turned away from the materials and back to the curator, then asked, might I ask what happened 15 years ago, when the war suddenly ended? The curator's gray eyes fixed on Kino. In turn, Kino's eyes fixed on the curator. A moment of silence passed, and the curator spoke up with a smile. That will be explained in the next section, Kino. There is not much time left before the museum closes, however. When is your departure, Kino and Hermes? We'll be leaving the day after tomorrow. Any time will do, as long as it is within the day. With Kino saying so, the curator proposed. In that case, we can show you the answer to your question tomorrow, Kino. Will you be able to spare the whole day? I certainly can. What about you, Hermes? I'm fine with it and all, but what are we going to look at? Hermes asked, and the curator answered. War. With a neighboring country. War? I don't want to be in combat. Hermes spoke frankly, stating strong opposition to the proposal. You need not be worried. In practice, it is not a conflict in which blood will be shed among us. It is only a war in name, and not a combat situation where we fight to the death. If you were to observe it, you are sure to understand how we made peace, and how we have been maintaining it. The next morning, Kino woke at the break of dawn, beginning the day with persuader practice and maintenance. Then, while eating breakfast at the hotel's restaurant, Kino noticed that the street seemed especially boisterous since early morning. Hermes, too, looked on with curiosity at the fleet of hovis, note, short for hover vehicle. Refers in this case to levitating cars that have been passing by the front of the hotel. Before long, Kino and Hermes were picked up by a young soldier who said that he had been told the whole story from the curator and that he would serve as their guide for the day. They made their way to the plaza in the center of town. At the plaza, 36 gray hovis were lined up. Half of them were equipped with fully automatic persuaders on both sides of their open decks, with ammunition belts fed into them. Kino and Hermes were invited on board one of the hovis labeled spectators. Seeing that there were difficulties in pushing Hermes up, the soldiers improvised by making a ramp up to the hovis deck using metal plates, enabling Kino to ride them atop up. All the while, they were applauded on by the onlookers. The fleet of hovis then departed, sent off with great fanfare. On the way, the fleet stopped for an early lunch break, then departed once again, gliding across the brown wasteland and crossing over 4 mountains before coming to a stop. After a short wait, another fleet of similar hovies appeared. And similarly, they were equipped with persuaders on their decks. The other party proceeded to line up their hovies in a beautiful and systematic formation. Their military uniform was completely different from that of the country Kino came with, whether it be the design, color scheme, and even how each of the pieces were matched together. All of them were not wearing pants, but skirts. They are the Rulsumia National Defense Force. The young soldier, responsible for guiding Kino and Hermes, filled them in on the matters. This Rulsumia is it the neighboring country you were at war with since a little less than 200 years ago? Hermes asked, and the soldier answered. That's right. From now, too, we will be going to war with them. The soldier then added. But don't worry. We are perfectly safe, in fact, not one soldier on either side will die. This is not the old-fashioned type of war, after all. Before long, the sun rose up to its zenith. Thereupon, hovies of both fleets, only the ones equipped with persuaders, moved out into a new formation, forming a beautiful and systematic double file. In their vanguard was a single hovie, one with especially elegant trappings. On it stood a man who seemed to be a priest. He started delivering a speech. The 185th Rulsumia Voldelval War shall commence henceforth. The rules are the same as always. His vessel moved out, and the 2 rows of hovies followed while staying in formation. We're going, too. Please hang on tight. The soldier told Kino and Hermes as the remaining hovies ascended, following the formation from above. Before long, the high-altitude hovies caught up to the fleet. Continuing on their way for a while longer, they passed over a gentle slope and stopped, hovering still in the air. There it is, can you see that? In the direction the soldier was pointing stood a large human settlement. Erected beside the oasis over the hill, the settlement comprised of many simple houses made of mud. They were scattered about with no defined pattern, nor were there roads connecting them. A number of people could be seen moving about. They wore simple clothes and employed simple tools. They seemed not to notice the hovies in the air. That is a local tribe, the Tatata. Anyways, please take a look at the ground to the north. Kino and Hermes looked in the direction they were told, observing the vanguard hovie descending, flying ahead with great speed just barely above the surface. The vehicle streaked its way through the settlement from the north side to the south, all the while dumping down a large quantity of red dust. It effectively drew a distinct red line across the north-south diameter of the settlement. A number of the Tatata tribespeople could be seen rushing out of their houses, seeming surprised and frightened. Now the war begins. The east side is our battlefield, and the west is Rulsumia's. As the soldier explained so, the fleet of hovies broke their formation and sped toward the settlement. From a straight line, they fanned out gracefully. The soldiers then proceeded to open fire. A shrill rattle echoed as the closest and most vulnerable of the Tatata tribespeople were being shot down. The hovies moderated their altitude so as to not crash into any of the houses, shooting the Tatata people on sight. A young man ran for the safety of his house, but was spotted and shot before he could go inside. He went down in a blossom of deep crimson. The barrage continued in the direction of his house, easily leveling the building. As the hovie turned around, several women and children rushed off a different house. They too were shot down. One woman attempted to shield a child. Her body twirled as she fell, and the small child's head was blown off. A man particularly fast with his legs ran past the side of another hovie. However, the hovie made a sharp turn and fired intercepting shots. The man collapsed in his path. His body twitched as bullets continued to hail down where he fell, gushing with blood like a bursting balloon, before finally ceasing all movement. All right. He's doing great. To Kino and Hermes' side, the soldier pumped his fist and shouted. An embarrassed grin then appeared on his face. Ah, excuse me, the one who just scored that shot there is my big brother. He's always been good at war. He said, then continued, as if he had just recalled the obligation to ask. Should we go down a little lower? You'll be able to get a better look. Kino replied. No, thank you. Up here is fine. With the offer declined, the soldier agreed, remarking that stray bullets are scary indeed. He then returned his sights to the battlefields down below. The sound of persuader shots continued to resound. Now, the hovies fired at the Tatata tribespeople who had escaped into the woods near the oasis. The woods, too, had been divided by the red line, and both forces skillfully kept their shots in each of their designated areas. East hovies shot only at the east side, the west ones only at the west. Before long, all of the trees were leveled, with bits of red visible between them. A number of people jumped into the pond of the oasis. They too were shot, the water dancing mad with the bullets. Before long, while the pond was being dyed a whole new color, clumps of indistinguishable matter rose up to the surface. Kino then turned to another location, noticing that a Tatata youth had thrown an axe at one of the Hovies. It struck a soldier on board in the leg. In turn, the soldier pinned his leg down and returned fire, shredding the youth in half and obliterating his upper body into a red mist. The soldier then rolled off his seat, however, and another soldier took over, gripping the persuader tight. Those who attempted to flee the settlement were picked off by the Hovies that were patrolling the borders, but it was not possible to shoot down all of them due to their sheer numbers. Those who were able to maneuver their way through the rain of bullets ran for their lives, bolting away from the settlement and fading into the distance. The Hovies did not pursue them, instead focusing on shooting down those who were still inside the perimeter. One of the Hovies slowly scanned the settlement, shooting down at those who were collapsed on the ground that seemed to not be bloodied enough. Bodies flew and scattered as bullets rained down on them. Those who were playing dead were effectively snuffed out. Eventually, the settlement was devoid of human movement. The sound of persuader shots, too, were mostly silenced by this point. Those who had bolted out of the settlement could no longer be seen. Coincidentally, the sun had waned down a one-fist length from its zenith. The same vanguard vessel as before streaked its way through the settlement once more, all the while blowing a whistle. The Hovies ceased their fire, gathered at the edge of the settlement, and formed the same line as when they arrived. "Time's up. The war has ended," the soldiers said as all of the airborne Hovies descended to the settlement grounds. "They are the counters. They'll be collecting the bodies onto their Hovies, then the sensors aboard their craft will weigh the kill. The side with higher measured weight is deemed the victor of this war. It is customary that we wait at the meeting point we came from, so we'll be taking off right away. Is that fine for you?" Kino nodded. The smell of blood drifted up high in the sky, then faded away as soon as the Hovies moved out. The Hovies returned to the meeting point, and the fleet awaited the counters. The soldiers were in good cheer, apparent from their bright expressions. Until then, they had not exchanged a word with their rivaling country, but now they were laughing, those on the Hovies from one row chatting with those on the other. The commanding officers, too, shared a table and held a friendly conversation. The soldier who had been hit in the leg with an axe reappeared all bandaged up, showered with applause and cheers from all soldiers present. He laughed, embarrassed, and was given a badge of some kind by the commanding officer. The soldiers cheered him on even more. At last, the counters returned. Each of their Hovies bore a mountain of corpses, blood streaming down from their decks. The same man who had announced commencement of the war stood on the deck of his Hovie and declared, "Measurement results. 10-9. Victor of the 185th War. Voldelval." Right that moment, the Voldelval soldiers exploded in cheer. The Rolsumia soldiers, on the other hand, held their heads up in disappointment. They soon recovered, however, and gave their rivaling nation a salute. The Voldelval soldiers returned their salute in kind. Then, while they were waving their hats at each other, each of their Hovies started on their way home. On board the same Hovie as Kino and Hermes, the soldier exclaimed, with no intention to hide his excitement. "We did it. We won. Kino, Hermes, this is going to be the talk of the town when we get back. Ah, I'm so happy. Oh, which reminds me, if you plan to buy anything for your travels, you really should buy them today. Everyone will be celebrating so hard that they'll give you super special bargains, I'm sure. Hey, can I ask you one thing?" Hermes called out to the soldier. "Go ahead, ask away. What are the counter going to do with the bodies? You're not going to bring them home as well, are you?" "Of course we're not bringing them back. We have a dumping ground to the east of the country. We'll be dropping them off there." "That's so? I thought that might be the case, too, so the mummy mystery is good as solved now, eh, Kino?" The next morning Kino woke, as always, at the break of dawn. The town was silent. Last evening, the country erupted in celebration of the news of their victory. It was in an uproar wherever one went. The town flooded with alcohol, cheers, and music. And just as the soldiers said, when Kino went to buy portable rations, the drunken old shopkeeper had offered them for next to nothing. Kino stocked up without restraint, to the point that Hermes warned, "I can't carry any more than that." They then returned to the hotel ahead of time. There was nobody else there. Kino started the day off with a shower, then persuader maintenance and practice. Then, after double-checking the baggage, Kino ate the older portable rations for breakfast. When the sun had risen well over the horizon, Kino knocked on Hermes up. Hermes was still half asleep, but when Kino remarked, "We've got to go to the History Museum, remember?" the Matorid was instantly wide awake. Kino proceeded to push Hermes along, putting into consideration that starting the Matorid's engine could disturb the townspeople who were still sleeping. At the entrance of the History Museum was the young soldier, asleep with a wine bottle hugged in his arms, seeming to have celebrated all night. 2 sheets of blankets had been put over him. Kino and Hermes quietly entered the museum and were welcomed by the curator. "Good morning, Kino and Hermes. Thank you for visiting us again." "Good morning, curator. We've come to see the section we hadn't seen the day before. Tickets for 2, please," Kino said, and the curator replied. "The tour is free of charge for the day. Today is a holiday in commemoration of the war, after all." She then led Kino and Hermes in through the exit side. They made their way through the dimly lit corridor, as the lights had not yet been turned on. "Please, go ahead," the curator said, switching on the lights on the display items. The sign designated this section as the evolution of war, a peaceful coexistence. The curator asked, "I take it that you have seen the war yesterday?" Hermes immediately replied, "Yes. We solved the mummy mystery, too." "I see." The curator nodded to the Matorid statement, then looked at Kino, as if she was urging the traveler on for a response. "Is that what you and the people here would call a war?" "All I could see was a massacre of the defenseless Tatata people," Kino said, in expression and tone completely unchanged from the usual. Not condemning, nor showing anger, nor expressing disgust. It was simply the posing of a question. The curator answered, "That is true based only on your experience yesterday. It is likely for you to see it that way. But that is our war. How did things turn out this way? If you don't mind, I would like an explanation, please." Kino's tone was comparable to those of students asking a teacher about subjects they don't understand. The curator turned on the lights inside the final display case, which featured contemporary history. "As you saw the day before, the war between countries never seemed to be ending." The curator switched on the monitor, and the title 2 minutes on the battlefield came on. Then, on the pitch-black screen, shapes and colors slowly appeared. Several soldiers, their faces visibly frightened, were crammed in a trench in the wasteland, gripping long persuaders in their hands. A whistle sounded, and the soldiers ducked. The sound cut out for a brief moment, and the image shook, dust scattering. One among the soldiers seemed to be shouting. Then, the moment sound returned, all of the soldiers leapt out of the trench in unison and charged onward. The footage followed them, showing the backs of the soldiers as they ran. The soldiers could now be heard, screaming. So could a separate whizzing sound, as some black objects flew at high speed. One of them landed on the ground, rebounded, and hit the soldier on the left side of the footage in his chest. Only his lower half remained in the end. For many years, war broke out time and time again without an end to them in sight, taking countless lives in the process. The man who had lost his upper half just now was my husband. The footage suddenly distorted, sound disappeared, all of the screen turned pitch black, then broke into static. The monitor was turned off. The curator waited until she had Kino attention, speaking up in a soothing voice when the traveler looked at her. "I remember the wars of the past clearly. I remember everything from that time. I had 4 sons once. They were my pride and joy, irreplaceable by anything in the world. After I lost my husband, I lived only to raise my children into fine men. But when the 169th war began, those children of mine one after another volunteered for the defense forces, swearing revenge on the enemies of their father. The first to die was Soto's, my second son, shot by a sniper. The following day was Dato's, my third son, blown to pieces when he stepped on a landmine." The wall of the display room, which had only been dimly lit, now had a large photograph projected onto it. It was of the curator from when she was still young, with long hair. She was surrounded by her 4 sons. Each child was smiling heartily, flashing their white teeth. Their mother was, too. Yudo's, my eldest son, stayed on the front lines to save his comrades, and was blown apart along with the enemy by friendly fire. Gyoto's, my youngest, last remaining child, left saying that he would fight his brother's shares, and that he would return alive. In the end, he never came back. The child was 9 at the time. The curator spoke with a voice of detachment, appearing as if she was smiling under the dim light. "As always, the war ended with the victor undecided. But we knew full well that the next one would soon begin. I saw no meaning in the continuation of the cycle of war. Why must the slaughters with no results repeat themselves? I saw 4 children as they left for the battlefield, lost them all, and was made an honorary citizen. I used this position to appeal to everyone. Let us end our wars, I said. The wars did not end just like that, of course. If that was enough to end wars, then it would be strange for them not to already be over. I thought about the things that could serve as realistic alternatives to war, and in the end, I made a proposal. Which was to raid the Tatata, wasn't it? That was your idea?" "Yes, that was it. The Tatata are proxy enemy forces, and whichever side kills more is the victor of that war. That way, the competitive spirit, animosity, and brutality intrinsic to us humans can be released. Also, when I announced my idea, there was a woman on the other side who happened to come up with a remarkably similar idea. Having said all that, the curator stepped forward, guiding Kino to the next display item. 15 years ago, when we first met each other, she showed me a photo. It was of her with her children. They were all so adorable indeed, and I could see that they were lovely, precious treasures of hers. They too had all been killed in action. The monitor now showed a photograph from the newspaper, the issue in which the situation back then was announced. The curator in the picture, even thinner than she was now, was embracing a woman in exotic clothing. Our plan was tested and put into practice. That was 15 years ago. The next monitor the curator switched on showed the scenes of this country in its present time. A peaceful town with happy residents, just as Kino saw for real. Since then, war never broke out between our nations. The countries proceeded to develop, their populations expanded. I'm sure young mothers today will never have to experience the same things I did. They can bring children into this world and raise them in happiness. And when the day comes, their own children will provide them with a proper burial. People die in the order in which they are born. That is what peace is, what the present time of this country is. Kino, Hermes. This is all the History Museum has to offer. The curator folded her hands before her chest. Thank you for your visit, she said with a smile. May I ask a question? Kino said. Yes, please go ahead. What of the Tatata people who were killed? I'm sure they have lives and families as well, don't they? Yes, it is as you said. But peace does not come without a cost. For it to be achieved, there must be some sacrifice. In the past, they were our precious children. Young soldiers fought on the hellish battlefield and died to protect their country. But things are different now. The Tatata are unable to fight back, and that is why there is no need for anyone to fight them. Our children no longer need to die on the battlefield. And that is a wonderful thing indeed. If we do not acknowledge the sacrifice of the Tatata, and if that resulted in the two countries going to war once again, the number of victims would be far greater than the number of Tatata who die now. The curator said, reflecting thoroughly upon each and every word. Then she repeated. Peace requires sacrifice. We will not allow that sacrifice to be our children. If the death of the Tatata could serve to maintain our peace, then we shall welcome it with open arms. Kino thought about it for a moment, then expressed some opinions. Curator, I don't understand. I don't know whether you are wrong, or the people of the past were right. Hearing that, the curator slowly produced a smile. She stooped slightly, put her hands on Kino's thin shoulders, and said gently, It is reasonable for you to think so. But when you are a little older, you will come to understand my feelings. You think so? You will, Kino. When you conceive your child, when you start feeling the warmth of that child inside you, you will surely understand. Kino, regarded here as a girl, did not reply. Kino departed from the country, sent off by a crowd so large that one might think all of the townspeople had come. The sun was still fairly high in the sky. Kino ran Hermes on the single straight path through the plain. A cloud of dust rose from beneath the motorid's wheels. They kept a consistently high speed from the time they left the walls until the sun had waned down a 2-fist length from its zenith, but the scenery did not change at all. Only brown earth, bald mountains in the distance, and the occasional large metal cans whisked by. Kino noticed that there was something in the direction they were heading. Then, after a short while, they could be identified as a gathering of people. Hermes noticed them as well. Someone's up ahead. Kino slacked off the accelerator. The traveler then noticed that they were the Tatata people. A number of brawny Tatata youths had blocked the path. They carried either hefty axes or poles taller than themselves. Kino brought Hermes to a stop right before them. About 20 Tatata tribespeople were present, and to their side was a herd of domestic animals they had apparently ridden here. Kino got down from Hermes, kicked down the motorid stand, then unbuttoned the coat and left it hanging on. The goggles and bandana were then removed. A young Tatata with a pole took a few steps toward Kino, then spoke up. You will be coming with us to our village, and there, you will be torn from limb to limb, while everyone watches you die. Kino looked at the Tatata tribespeople. There were women, children, and the elderly among them. All were glaring at Kino. Why? Kino asked, not seeming to be surprised. For our revenge. So that we could satisfy our desire for revenge, even if only a little. I am not a citizen of that country, Kino said calmly. The young man continued with a detached voice, suppressing his emotion. We know that. You are a traveler, I take it? We do not know whether or not you are aware, but we despise that country. They slaughter us for no reason, and they dump our dead beyond reach. We cannot even give our loved ones a burial. But no matter how hard we fight, we cannot win. So that is why we wish to kill anyone who passes through these parts by chance like you now, so that we could dispel our anger, even if only a little. You are not at all in the wrong. You are simply unlucky. He slowly approached Kino. Hermes spoke up, exasperated. What are you gonna do, Kino? You gonna let them eat you or what? Kino did not answer Hermes's question, instead speaking up with raised voice, so as to address all the Tatada present. We are now aware of your circumstances and feelings. But I have no desire to die here. The most I can do is promise to never forget the story of your people. Now, if I may excuse myself. Having said just that, Kino turned to Hermes. The Tatada youth drew near, swinging his pole with the intention to knock Kino out cold. Kino spun back around. For the mere instant Kino looked up at him, their eyes met, the distance between them shorter than an arm's reach. The young man aimed for the head of his target, bringing down his pole together with a battle cry. YAHHH. Kino twisted slightly to the right, pulling cannon from its right thigh holster with blinding speed, then fired. Accompanying the thunderous roar was the white smoke characteristic of liquid propellant, instantly filling the gap between them, then just as quickly fading away. The youth froze in his stance, still holding on to his pole. His face was raised up. Then he fell over backward, raising a cloud of dust when he hit the ground. Blood oozed like a muddy stream from his upper jaw, overflowed from his mouth, stained his chest red, and was absorbed by the dry earth. Kino, with cannon in right hand, watched on as the other Tatada tribespeople fled. Before long, they were out of sight. What are you gonna do with this guy? Bury him? Hermes asked. No, the others will probably come back later. To give him a burial. While Kino said that, the persuader was returned to its holster, its hammer slightly raised up and interposed, with the tip of the holster's leather prominence. Kino mounted Hermes, put on goggles and bandana, then said, "Let's go." "Sure." Hermes replied without a moment's delay. So the Matora took off, leaving the dead body behind. A cloud of dust rose in their wake. It blanketed over the collapsed, lifeless Tatada youth. When the dust finally let up, the Matorid was no longer there to be seen. Epilogue. In the forest, a lost in the forest A. At night, in the forest. There, big trees stood in rows, their branches and leaves forming a canopy. In daylight, the leaves were bright green, but now they were black. Next to the roots spreading throughout the ground, the small lingering flame of a bonfire flickered. Amid the dimness created by that flame, Kino sat there, body wrapped in a coat, back leaned against a curved surface created by a tree's thick trunk and roots, eyes closed. A short distance away from the bonfire stood Hermes, all luggage unloaded. Metallic parts twinkled with reflections of the flame. "Kino? Do you still awake?" Hermes asked in a whisper. "Yeah. I'm awake." Kino gave a prompt reply. Hermes then spoke in a lower tone than usual. Matorids are at their happiest when they're running. Going on a journey means running every day. Therefore, traveling is very fun. Aha? What's with this, all of a sudden? Kino asked, apparently surprised. Hermes then spoke in a tone resembling those of teachers. Don't you know, Kino? It's called sylogos. Syllogism? Yeah, that. Having said that, Hermes then went silent. What of it? Kino asked, showing curiosity in the topic that Hermes had brought up. Well, I just got a little curious about it. That if that's the case, then why do humans travel, you see? Hermes asked in an unusually earnest expression. Humans? Or just me? Kino asked a question in return, also in an earnest tone. First, humans. Let's see, Kino murmured, then. They want to go somewhere they've never been to before. Want to see things they've never seen. Want to eat things they've never eaten. Want to talk to people they've never met before, those kind of things. Should be pretty simple. Yeah. That's not difficult to understand. Hermes said, seeming to make sense of it. I see. It might be more complicated in a practical sense, but that's an easy way to put it. Then what about you, Kino? Why do you keep on traveling? I mean, I know that you don't have a place to go back to. But I think you've been met with a lot of cruelty, even nearly killed, and faced countless hardships on the road. Don't you ever think about settling down in one place? With persuader skills of your level, just about any place will hire you. There were a lot of ways to make a living back at Master's place as well. After Hermes said all that in one go, Kino replied in a quiet tone. You're right. It's as you said in that aspect, Hermes. Hermes waited a brief while. Then, seeing that Kino isn't saying anything more, asked a question. Then, despite that, what's the reason for you to keep on traveling? Without answering that question, Kino's slender figure rose up. Left hand gripping woodsman, right hand throwing dirt onto the bonfire. The barely lingering embers vanished.
Afterword preface. I am someone who reads the afterwords of a book before its text. I suppose someone who can't stand not reading them first would be the correct way to put it. At bookstores, I would often decide whether or not to buy books by reading their afterwords. But because of that, it would be troubling if the afterword contained major spoilers of the text or key tricks to figuring things out. It had happened to me many times. That is why I decided that, if I were to write my own afterwords, I would absolutely not write spoilers of the text in them. I had been keeping that determination to heart all these 20-odd years I have lived. Therefore, this afterword will not be containing any spoilers, safe to read for those who have not yet read the text. It will be comfortably short, ending in exactly 2 pages, which should also be wonderful for those of you who are sampling books in stores while carrying heavy bags under your arms, yes? With all that said, this is Kino's Journey the Beautiful World. This work was chosen as a finalist of the 6th Dengeki Game Novel Prize. While regrettable that it failed to win any awards, it was published as a one-shot in Dengeki Horsepower, then ended up here among the ranks of Dengeki Bunko. Furthermore, added to the story published in Dengeki Horsepower, Chapter 2, were additional content and the wonderful illustrations courtesy of Kuroboshi Kohaku-san. I say this will be a good purchase for those who have already read it as well. Since this work is a collection of short stories, each chapter is self-contained. Although this means it is perfectly fine to read them in any order, for the first time through, I recommend reading them in the order they are presented. Then if you were to read them in an order of your leisure the second time through, you might even get a different feel to them. To explain the story in simple terms, I would say. The main character, Kino, and the partner, Hermes, goes on a journey. They go around to various different countries, that is all. You may be thinking, what the hell? You haven't explained anything. But I have a feeling that you will somehow understand when you finish reading the text. Something like that. Well then, please enjoy the story.